Story number 1, The Shadow. In apartment 7. You're in your quiet apartment, the kitchen dim under flickering lights. A shadow moves, tall and silent, gliding through the wall, its presence cold and deliberate. I saw a shadow person walk through my kitchen and at the time didn't take it too seriously. You blink, thinking it's a trick of the eye, but your friend sees it too, same shape, same place, chilling you both. I was freaked out, but reasoned it away and thought I was seeing things and kind of forgot about it. The air shifts, heavy with unseen eyes, and your keys vanish from the table, only to reappear with a clank that stops your heart. About a month later, my friend visiting also saw it and described it to me exactly in the same place as my kitchen. Your guests tremble, refusing to return, while you, drawn to the strange, feel the apartment watching, waiting, same height, body shape. Something lives here, in apartment 7, and it's not done playing with you. It really freaked us out. The shadow owns the apartment, and you're just a guest. A few other house guests saw him over the course of my stay in that apartment, in which many other unexplainable things happened. You're finishing your undergrad, living in a small, 2-bedroom apartment, a haven of independence. The one thing that stands out, though, is the story with the keys. You brush off the shadow at first, blaming late nights. But its presence lingers, tall and formless, cutting through the kitchen's dim glow. I lived in this apartment for 2 years while I finished my undergrad, and I often went home to see family. Friends confirm it, same figure, same spot, their fear sharper than yours. On one trip, I told my dear friend John he could feel free to use my house, stay there, or just watch TV to get away from his controlling family that he still lived with. You're no stranger to the weird, witchcraft or ghosts. They fascinate you. But this feels different, deliberate. I gave him my keys and asked him to be sure not to lose them, as I had already lost the spares. Lights flicker. Doors creak. Objects shift when you're not looking. So he and 3 of our good friends go up there for the weekend to my house. You lend your place to John, a skeptic, for a movie night with friends, trusting him with your only keys. The first day they get there, John asked the group to help him remember to get the keys and lock up after they were done having movie night. The keys are gone, and the shadow knows why. They all said they saw him put the keys in the center of the dining room table, and they commenced having fun. John sets the keys on the dining table, all 4 friends watching. But hours later, they're missing. A few hours later, they're heading out, and John goes to grab the keys, but they are not on the table anymore. Panic sets in. John's certain, the others confirm. Yet the keys are gone. He freaks out because he had been so sure to say to everyone, and everyone saw him put them there. They tear the apartment apart, under furniture, behind cushions, in drawers, but find nothing. Then it became a key hunting party, and everyone starts looking everywhere. Sarah, sensitive to the strange, feels a tingle, an energy like the air's holding its breath, but keeps quiet, guilt gnawing at her. Did they fall on the floor? You're away, unaware, as John nears tears. The group huddling, debating whether to call you. Did they fall behind the couch? Then it happens. A sharp clank from the dining room, like metal on wood. They looked everywhere. They freeze. John bolting to the table, where the keys now sit, exactly where he left them. 2 hours later, John is in near tears and everyone is freaked out. John, the skeptic, goes pale, fleeing the apartment, the others trailing, locking the door behind them. Now, none of these people except one. Sarah knew my apartment had strange things going on. The apartment's alive, and it's not letting go. She later told me she could feel a strange energy in the house after the keys went missing, like a tingly feeling of anticipation. You returned to a slightly messy apartment, John, confessing, shaken, backed up by all four friends' identical stories. She didn't want to scare John, as she was already feeling guilty for maybe losing my keys. Sarah pulls you aside, refusing to return her fourth encounter too much. So she didn't mention any of this until I got back. You shrug, used to the weird, but their fear lingers, a contrast to your curiosity. So it's almost hour 3, and all four of them are gathered in the front room around the corner from the dining room and talking about what to do. You search online, finding forums, others in old apartments, shadows moving, objects vanishing, reappearing. I think they were right about to call me. A neighbor mentions noises before you moved in, but no history explains it. That's when the whole group hears a distinct sound in the other room, and they all jump a bit. You dig into the building's past, rumors of a tenant lost to time, tied to number 7. John goes running around the corner, and the keys are just there where he left them in the middle of the table. You post your story, connecting with those who felt watched, their keys misplaced, their homes not theirs. Now, John doesn't believe in anything supernatural. The shadow doesn't scare you, it fascinates. But your friends won't visit, some sleeping in your yard to escape. He always made fun of me for being into witchcraft and ghosts. The shadow stays, but you don't. And Sarah told me he went all white, which was massively impressive for a very tan Chinese guy, and ran out the door. You move out after graduation, the apartment a memory, its shadow a story you carry. Everyone else walked out after him, and quickly they locked the door. You live in a brighter place now, but check corners, listen for clanks. When I got home, the house was a bit disheveled, but everything was as it should have been. You dream of the figure, tall and silent, gliding through walls, watching. John, nearly in tears, described what happened. You joined a paranormal group, their tales echoing yours, shadows, objects playing tricks, homes alive. At first, I thought they were all joking, but all four of them had the same story, and they aren't very big jokesters. A local historian speaks of old buildings, restless energies, but no names. Sarah told me that she would not be coming to my house anymore. You write a blog sharing apartment 7, warning of shadows that linger. And I think this was like the 4th strange thing she'd seen at my house. And it was by far the most intense. Others reply, keys gone, shadows seen, apartments that don't let go. I kind of just had to shrug because I had to keep living there. You don't fear the dark, but you feel it, waiting somewhere for the next tenant to notice. And if I freak out, well, where would I go? Story number 2, the poop paradox. My bedroom was a trap, locking me in a body that wouldn't move. Sleep paralysis was my unwelcome guest, striking when I napped on my back, pulling me into a world of unseen terrors. Voices whispered outside, footsteps circled, but one word shattered the fear with laughter. A single, absurd cry of "poop" broke the spell, turning dread into delight. This is the story of the strangest nightmare I ever had, and the word that saved me. The air was heavy, my limbs frozen as the paralysis took hold. I'd felt it before, entities choking me, dragging me to the ceiling, or the sensation of falling through walls. But this time, shadows moved beyond my window, their voices a murmur of menace. I strained to break free, to hear their words, but they stayed just out of reach. Something was coming, and I was helpless, caught in a dream that wasn't mine. I get sleep paralysis during the day and a nap if I'm on my back. It's a ritual, a terror, always one of 4 horrors. An invisible entity trying to choke me and drag me around the room up to the ceiling especially, or a sense of falling, like I'd slip through the floor. Just a general falling or flying sensation. Sometimes I see figures, friends, strangers, or my partner. The 4th kind is where I see people all around, whether they be strangers or friends or my significant other. I was napping, the room dim. When it hit, I'm in the bedroom napping and sleep paralysis happens. Voices echoed outside, a crowd pacing past my window. This time it sounds like there's a bunch of people walking back and forth outside the bedroom window. I fought to move, to hear them clearly. I'm trying to move, trying to hear the voices better, trying to just beat the hell out of it. They were close, their words a jumble. Until one voice cut through. One male voice comes in clear as a bell and just says, "Poop!" Laughter tore me free. The spell shattered. I broke the spell and I woke up laughing my ass off at the singular word. The terror dissolved into absurdity. The word so out of place it was genius. 10 out of 10 sleep paralysis experience would gladly do over again. I lay there, grinning. The voice is gone, the room mine again. The fear was real, but that one word made it a story I'd tell forever. What? Story number 3, The Stalker's Sacrifice. The night was thick with silence, the kind that presses against your skin. I sat in my room, the glow of my phone dim, when a sound cut through, a faint scrape like a shovel biting dirt. My heart skipped, my eyes darting to the window, where the pet cemetery lay, a patch of earth we'd buried Jasper in just hours before. Something was out there, moving in the dark. I held my breath, the house too quiet, the air heavy with dread. The scraping grew louder, deliberate. Coming from the yard where Jasper's grave was marked, Cindy, my sister, slept down the hall, her sobs for her cat still echoing in my mind. But this wasn't her, this was someone else, someone who didn't belong, defiling the only peace we had left. I crept to the window, my hands trembling, the moonlight casting shadows across the graves. A figure stood there, hunched, digging, their coat too familiar, too wrong. My stomach churned, bile rising as I watched them pull something from the earth. Jasper, lifeless, stolen. The night wasn't ours anymore. It was his. And he was here for us. Fear turned to rage, my hands shaking as I gripped my phone, ready to wake Cindy, to call for help. But the figure moved, not away but closer, their actions a violation, a message I couldn't unread. They knew where we lived, knew what we loved, and they weren't done, not with Jasper, not with us. This wasn't just a prank, not just a creep, this was a predator. A shadow that had followed Cindy from her work, from her life, into our home. The cats, the house, the night, they were his now, and we were trapped in his game. A game that started with a dead cat and wouldn't end there. I live in a rather secluded home with my 21-year-old half-sister, Cindy, since neither of us have parents. Anyway, we literally have 20 outdoor cats freely roaming the property. Except Jasper, Cindy's big Maine tabby, who she spoils the heck out of and probably loved more than most people. Honestly, I can't say I blamed her for that. Jasper loved to cuddle, was friendly to everyone, and he usually would greet us outside when I came home from school. As far as cats come, Jasper sure was one of a kind. The house was our sanctuary, a quiet patch of land surrounded by fields, far from neighbors except old Doris across the way. Due to a severe outbreak of CO in my area, my school forced us to transfer to virtual learning until further notice. Unlike a lot of other kids, I don't mind online learning because of this. My connection is so bad I can't even access Google Meets. I get out of participating in the live stream and simply just do my homework. So anyway, when Cindy found out we were switching to online, she immediately told me that she wanted me to go to work with her and I could do my schoolwork there. When I asked her why she wanted me to go with her, she proceeds to tell me that she doesn't feel safe with me being here home alone all day. This baffled me because during the summer, I was left home alone the entire freaking day while she was at work. And it was never a problem, but I was a bit suspicious, but decided it was best to not pitch up an argument. I thought maybe she was just lonely, needing company. My sister works 3 different jobs depending on the shifts she picks up, and the last job of the day is either the dealership or the local Japanese restaurant. So I had to sit in a booth or a chair somewhere in the corner doing my homework while my sister went on her own doing her little tasks. It sucked, yes. And I was still inwardly fuming at the fact why I couldn't have just done all this at home. And I eventually found that out. I was sitting in a booth with my MacBook finishing up an assignment that I'd been procrastinating on when a guy walked through the front entrance. He at first appeared to be a pretty normal dude. So I initially didn't pay much mind to him. But when he sat down at the bar and kept trying to talk to my sister, who blatantly showed little interest in speaking to him, was when I couldn't tear my attention away. His voice was too loud, his smile too forced, his eyes too fixed on Cindy. As I mentioned prior, my sister is 21, and I couldn't really tell because half of his face was obscured by a mask. But this dude had to be at least his 30s, so it's no surprise she wasn't interested. But as this continued to escalate, I literally had to plug my nose in order to suppress my laughter. Could this guy seriously not take a hint? My amusement faded, replaced by unease. His persistence wasn't charming, it was obsessive, a shadow that clung to Cindy's every move. The restaurant, her safe space, was his now. And I was starting to see why she didn't want me home alone. I felt a twinge of sympathy for my sister, though it's never fun dealing with some douchebag who's relentless. Finally, when Cindy's shift ended, she seemed happier than ever to get the hell out of there. Being the younger sister, of course, I teased her about it and said something along the lines of, "So, who's the guy you were talking to?" And she literally cringed as though she was caused physical pain. Cindy went on to tell me that the guy had been coming to visit her at work for some time. He had introduced himself as Chandler and claimed that he lived relatively close to us. My sister was dubious about that, though, because the only person that lives near us is our neighbor Doris, a woman in her 60s. After that, we headed back home. But what she said had only brought more questions to the forefront. Why did Cindy want me to go to work with her? Was she scared of the guy coming to our house and doing something to me while she was away? The thoughts sent chills skittering down my spine. As we were driving back to the house, I ventured to ask Cindy what exactly this guy knows about her. And she said the only information she gave out was her first name and how old she was, and that she had a younger sister and stuff about the cats, but had never given him so much as a hint as where we lived. And I have to admit, it made me feel quite queasy, but perhaps could have just been a neighbor we'd never met. I haven't even lived with my sister for a year at that point, and she hasn't even lived in the area for that long either. So I just dropped the subject, but the unease lingered, a knot in my stomach that tightened every time I thought of his face, his voice. However, as the days went on and I had to spend my school days at my sister's work, this dude occasionally showed up to hit on her. And the creepy thing was that this dude knew every place she worked, which I was absolutely disturbed by. Unless, which I doubt, Cindy had told her exact schedule and all the places she worked. I suggested to Cindy that maybe she should call the cops, but I couldn't imagine what help they could do. Considering that the creeper hadn't broken any laws yet, he was just being a creep. Cindy concluded the same thing and said that maybe, if she continues not showing any interest, he'd finally get the hint and leave her alone. I then asked her the reason she wanted me coming to work, and she admitted that it was because of this guy. I felt like a jerk for being so annoyed about it in the past. If I was scared on her behalf, I couldn't imagine how uncomfortable she must have felt. The fear wasn't just Cindy's, it was mine now. 2. His shadow followed us, not just to her work, but to our home, our sanctuary. The cats, Jasper, the quiet nights, they weren't safe anymore, not with him out there, watching, waiting for a crack to slip through. Unfortunately, the guy never seemed to get the damn hint and continued to pull stuff on Cindy. On an unbusy day at the Japanese restaurant, the infamous dude dragged his stump ass into the building and jumped into his casual business of pestering my sister. And about the 1300th time of politely turning him down, Cindy finally snapped and made a huge scene of going absolutely crazy on the guy, shouting at him that she was not interested and to just leave her alone and to never bother her again. Humiliated, the dude slipped out of the restaurant, leaving my sister seething in his wake. And if I'm being honest, I've never seen my sister go off like that on anyone, not even my misbehaving ass. Cindy began to full-out slobber into her co-worker's shoulder after that, and everyone there was wondering what the hell happened. I couldn't blame them. I just really hoped the dude was done with this creepy shenanigan stuff. But boy, was I wrong. After everything went down, he stopped coming to my sister's work and seemed to quit bothering her altogether. She thought her outburst was what finally did the trick and we wouldn't have to deal with the freak anymore. But she still wanted me coming to work just to be safe. And if I'm going to be truthful, I was actually okay with that. The relief was fragile, a thin hope that didn't last. Strangely, as the creepless week progressed, something was going on with Jasper. He was throwing up and having some sort of diarrhea and just seemed overall too exhausted to move. Cindy, of course, was extremely worried and stated that the poor cat must have gotten into poison or ate something weird outside. She scheduled an appointment to take Jasper to the vet, but unfortunately, Jasper had passed away before then. And to say the least, Cindy was absolutely heartbroken. She really loved that cat. And losing an important pet can sometimes hurt as much as losing another person. I went through the same situation in my former home with an animal I was close to. After several dismissal hours of my sister wailing like a toddler and clutching her cat to her chest, She told me that we were going to bury Jasper out back. Cindy had kind of a pet cemetery at the edge of our yard, which was visible from the window. I helped her bury Jasper and made a little headstone to place on his grave. And after that, I heaved up an attempt to comfort her by making some tea and petting on the office, but she still couldn't stop crying. The house felt empty without Jasper's purrs, his warmth, his presence. Later that night, at around 1 a.m., I was in the middle of FaceTiming my friend when this faint digging sound emitted outside my window. I shut up instantaneously and began listening. I made sure what I was hearing was real, and it was. Someone was outside at 1 o'clock in the morning digging a hole in our yard. My heart stopped, my hands shaking as I ended the call. The sound wasn't random. It was deliberate, a violation of our grief, our home. I knew, before I looked, that it was him, the creep, the shadow who'd followed Cindy, who'd taken Jasper from us. And now he was back for more. Keep in mind, this is private property. What the hell? I muttered. She kept asking what was going on, and I responded saying that I'd be right back, and hung up. With my stomach in knots, I crawled across my bed over to my window. Could it have been Cindy? I hesitantly peeked through the shades, and my heart leapt into my throat with what I saw. Provided by the moonlight, I was able to scope out a silhouetted figure in the middle of the pet cemetery, digging in what appeared to be Jasper's grave. What the hell? This definitely was not Cindy. I couldn't make out any of their features, but the telltale oversized trench coat that they were wearing appeared to be giving me everything I needed to know. The bile in my stomach curdled with nausea. It couldn't have been the creep. What the hell was he doing in our pet cemetery at this time of night? I couldn't unglue my eyes from the macabre scene, watching as the creep finally tossed aside the shovel and reached into the hole, pulling out Jasper's giant form. I absolutely hate to relive this moment, but he began to do unspeakable things to the cat corpse, things that no teenager or anyone should ever have to witness. My mouth dropped open in horror. Distraught, I finally tore my gaze away and released the scream locked in my chest and began to cry. Darting to Cindy's room at wind speed, I practically ripped the door off its hinges, shrieking and sobbing at my sister to get up and get the hell out of there, and that there was someone doing stuff to our dead cat. I had to re-explain the situation at least 3 times before Cindy could understand what I was screaming about. When she did, she didn't even bother looking outside and just dialed 911. The cops took so long to arrive, and the creep had probably the sense to flee due to the cacophony of sound going on inside. When they searched the property, I remember cracking some joke like, I wonder what Stephen King would think of this version of Pet Cemetery, which Cindy did not find amusing. Unsurprisingly, the guy was nowhere to be found, and neither was Jasper's corpse. So, that sick guy actually took the cat with him and would continue to do God knows what to it, unless the freak had been watching us bury him. I didn't know how he knew the precise spot to dig. Cindy was so upset that she started crying, and I can't say I was in much of a better condition. The cops eventually left, and there wasn't anything left to do besides fall back into an uneasy sleep. I was so disturbed that night that I ended up staying in my sister's room and maybe got 2 hours of sleep at most, since the sickening image had been seared into my brain. The next day, however, I heard Cindy shriek from the other room. I ran out as fast as I could, demanding to know what happened and if everything was all right. And she handed me a splotchy slip of paper and said she found it taped to the front door, and it read something along the lines of, "I couldn't have you, so I had to have what was closest to you. See? So, because Cindy rejected this creep, he seriously snaked onto our property while we were away, poisoned her cat, an innocent, unsuspecting animal, and ultimately ended up stealing the poor thing's corpse to do things to. Now, I've met some messed up people in my life, but this seriously tops the list." After she read it over again, Cindy promptly ripped up the paper and tossed it into our fireplace in disgust. I snapped to her, saying we should have turned it in as evidence, but she shook her head. Thankfully, we haven't seen or heard from him since then, and I really hope it stays that way. Eventually, my sister allowed me to start staying home alone again if I promised to keep all the doors locked and call her immediately if anything else weird went on. To the creep, you're a sicko. And I hope one day you come to your senses and get the help you so very desperately need. I don't know what you planned on doing with Jasper, but I hope you never bother my sister or any of her cats again. The weeks that followed were a haze of fear and grief. Cindy barely spoke, her eyes red from crying, her hands clutching mugs of tea that went cold. The other cats roamed the yard, oblivious, but their presence was a reminder of Jasper, of the hole in our home. I locked every door, checked every window, my phone always charged, always close. Doris, our neighbor, came by, her face pale as we told her, haltingly, what happened. She started checking her own yard, her own cats, afraid he'd come for her too. We installed cameras, their red lights blinking in the dark, a fragile shield against the night. I stopped sleeping alone. Crashing in Cindy's room, the memory of that figure, that trench coat, burned into my mind. We reported it to the police again, gave them his name, Chandler, but they had nothing. No trace, no leads. The note, burned, was gone. A mistake we couldn't undo. They patrolled, promised to watch, but it felt hollow, like they didn't believe the depth of his sickness, the danger he posed. I researched stalkers, desperate for answers. There were stories, men obsessed, crossing lines, hurting what their targets loved. Some used animals, a twisted way to punish, to control. Each story was a knife, a reminder of how close we'd come, how much we'd lost. I found a forum, shared our story, and got replies. Others who'd faced the same, who'd lost pets, who'd moved to escape. One mentioned a man in a trench coat, a name like Chandler, but it was miles away. Years ago, unconfirmed, a ghost in the data. One night, I found a scratch on the back door, faint but deliberate, like a claw or a knife. It could have been a cat, a branch, but I didn't think so. I showed Cindy, and we moved the next month to a new house, smaller, closer to town, with locks that felt like lies. Jasper's grave stayed behind, a wound we couldn't visit. We kept the cats inside now, their freedom traded for safety, their purrs of fragile comfort against the fear that he was still out there, still watching, still holding Jasper's corpse, a trophy of his hate. Story number 4, The Napkin Poet. I live in the Valley of Sacramento, California, a few miles from the American River. The valley was a patchwork of quiet streets and wild edges, where the river's hum was a constant companion. The town was a relic, its heart beating slow, hiding secrets in its shadows. This particular river is only a short walk away from a vintage part of my town, where there is absolutely nothing but chickens and a family-owned business. The vintage strip was a ghost of another era, its silence broken only by clucking hens and the hum of small shops. My first job was a family-owned coffee shop when I was 16 in this little town. The shop was a haven, warm with the scent of coffee, but it drew more than just locals. The river brought wanderers, their eyes carrying stories I wasn't ready to read. I was young, eager, unaware of the man who'd mark me with his words. The shop was a stage, and I was its unwitting star. A lot of the homeless folk often flocked to the rivers and would often wander into my shop. They came with weathered faces, their lives etched in lines and scars. I dealt with the odd bodies on and off almost every day without a care. I served them with a smile, their presence routine, their stories background noise. But one man stood apart, his gaze a weight I couldn't shake. One weirdo I remember vividly enough that it still makes me sit and wonder. He wasn't like the others. His presence was deliberate, his silence loud. The shop was my world, but he was an intruder, rewriting its rules. I didn't know it then, but his napkins would become my nightmare. He was a shadow, always watching. When I was new to the shop, it took some time to get to know the regulars and remember their names. Faces blurred, names slipped, but one burned into my mind. I had a lot of faces to memorize. The counter was a parade of smiles and orders, but his face lingered, one face in particular, for some reason, sat in my mind far above the others. A stout, bald man with a wide nose and thinly trimmed glasses. He was unremarkable, yet unforgettable. His features sharp in my memory. He wasn't quite old, but he wasn't the youngest man I'd met. His age was a mystery, his presence timeless. He was ordinary, but his eyes were not. They saw too much, held too long. The shop was bright, but he brought a chill, a darkness I couldn't name. His ritual was a warning. He would stand outside of my store for about 10 minutes every day before coming in to stand in the back of the cafe and watch me and my other co-workers clean and make coffee. His vigil was silent, his gaze a tether. Sometimes he wouldn't order anything, but when he did, he would always get a small black coffee and a small serving of potato salad. The order was simple, but his intent was not. He would always ask for napkins and would always ask for a pen. The napkins were his canvas, the pen his weapon. After ordering, he would proceed to write things down on one of the napkins, leave his empty coffee cup on a table, and take his food out the door, where he would stand and watch us pick up his trash. His watch was a ritual, his eyes following my hands. I noticed over time that he seemed to look irritated when I wasn't the one to do it. His irritation was personal, a claim I didn't understand. His words were a creeping threat. Every time he did this, he would leave small notes in poor, rough handwriting and would then throw away his salad outside. The notes were scraps, but they carried weight. His notes were more personal. They weren't for the shop, they were for me. At first, I thought of it as nothing more than a sweet thank you. The early notes were harmless, a gesture I dismissed. I wrote notes too, small kindnesses on receipts. I often write small notes to servers on receipts from time to time, things like wonderful day and thank you. But his notes grew darker, more intimate. But these slowly morphed. Beautiful day. Take a break. I'm outside. You look lovely today. Love your hair. Each word was a step closer, a boundary crossed. The napkins weren't notes. They were confessions, a map of his obsession. His gaze became a cage. My coworkers would make a gag out of the notes if they weren't thrown away before reading one. Their laughter was light, but it didn't ease the knot in my stomach. Once I assumed he figured out that the other girls were the ones grabbing them, he adapted, his focus sharpening. He began to leave them on one end of the counter where my espresso machine was. The counter was my station. His notes, a violation. You make me happy. Kenny, one of them read. My name, scrawled in his hand, was a shock. I still don't know how he learned my name or who asked, but I presume one of my coworkers on a day I was off. The betrayal stung, my name a weapon he shouldn't have. I began to get increasingly uncomfortable whenever he would stand outside and watch me work, or when he would order from my till. His eyes were a weight, his presence a chain. I could only smile and thank him as I got his coffee and salad in my customer service voice. My smile was a mask, my voice a shield, but both were cracking. The restroom was a turning point. 1 week. He worked his routine of window shopping before ordering, asking for napkins and a pen and going about his letter. His ritual was unchanged, but something was off. He did not ask for a pen or napkins, but proceeded to only ask for the coffee. The change was subtle, but ominous. He left to the restroom. His absence was a relief, but it didn't last. I forgot how long he was in there since I myself took my lunch break as soon as the order was done. The break was a respite, a moment to breathe. When I returned, I was told that someone had left their cup in the restroom and it had been emptied and left on top of the toilet. The cup was ordinary, but its contents were not. It was filled with semen. The discovery was a violation, a stain on the shop. I didn't know it was him, but the timing was too close, the coincidence too cruel. The restroom was a crime scene. His presence a shadow I couldn't escape. He vanished, but not his mark. I didn't see him for a while because I had traded my early starts for closing shifts. The change was a shield, a chance to hide, but he found me. His pursuit relentless. The last time I saw him, he came in late. The night was heavy, the shop quiet. I presume he either found out by stalking or asking my coworkers why I was no longer a morning maid. His knowledge was a threat, his intent clear. He asked me kindly for a cup of coffee and potato salad, a pen and a napkin. His voice was soft, but his eyes were not. I obliged, but I was hardly enthusiastic. My hands moved on instinct, my heart racing. The routine went normally. He drank his coffee, sat and wrote, left it on the counter without looking up, and walked out into the night. His departure was swift, but not final. He didn't stop to watch Ickis. He didn't throw away his salad. The break in routine was a warning, a shift I didn't trust. You're lovely every time. Thank you for the smiles. Leave the glitter to the blondes. I don't know what this means. You're a young flower amongst the sunset. Billy, the note was poetry, but not kind. A riddle, a farewell. Billy wasn't my name, but it felt like a claim, a final mark. The shop changed me. He never returned, but his absence was as heavy as his presence. I never saw him come into the store or look outside the window. The windows were clear, but I saw him in every shadow. I don't often lend out pens as much as I used to. The pens were tainted, tools of his obsession. The shop was no longer a haven. It was a stage, and I was its captive. I worked my shifts, but my smile was gone, my eyes scanning for his face. The river still flowed, the chickens still clucked, but the town felt smaller, its edges sharper. The napkins were his legacy, a scar I carried. His poetry haunts me. So creepy poetry napkin guy. Let's not meet. The words were a vow, a prayer to keep him away. I left the shop eventually, but not the memory. The notes are gone, but their words linger, a whisper in my mind. I walk past the river now, its waters calm, but I don't trust the quiet. The town is mine, but he took something, a piece of my ease, my trust in strangers. Don't leave notes for servers. Don't watch from the shadows. Story number 5. The Unseen Guest. The house was a haven, but it wasn't ours. My name's Kalia, a grad student from Hawaii, house sitting with my husband, Nate, in a stranger's mansion. We were house sitting for these rich people. The luxury was a mask hiding something older, darker. Some crazy stuff started to happen just a few days in. The air was heavy, the shadows alive. We couldn't figure out how to get the motion sensor light in the entry garage hallway to turn off. It flickered, a beacon for the unseen. The first night set the tone. I was watching TV and you can see the front door from the living room. A figure moved, silent and wrong. I saw a shadow man walking by the front door. It wasn't new. I'd seen them before. A curse of the islands. Shadow people are frequent visitors of mine, but this felt personal, like it knew me. I think it must be a Hawaii thing because everyone here has seen them. The house wasn't empty, and it wanted me to know. The shadows grew bolder. I hadn't seen my husband for several minutes. I called out, my voice swallowed by the house. I called out to him and saw the front motion detecting light flip on again. Nate answered from the backyard, not the front. I walked out, then heard him go. What? From the backyard? Something else triggered the light. I quickly walked to the backyard through the house. Then I saw it, a glowing orb, Toodle fleeting and cold. I saw an orb zoom out of the house. The orb was no trick of the light. I've watched orbs on the paranormal shows on Discovery Channel. I'd scoffed before, but this was real. Never thought they were real until I actually saw one. It moved with purpose, a spirit unbound. Pretty creepy. The house pulsed with energy, its presence growing. A different motion detecting light started going crazy one night. Nate, my anchor, broke. My husband, who you may call the rational one, is totally freaked out. Curiosity warred with fear. I felt extremely curious and wanted to investigate. I wasn't brave, but something pulled me. I'm a serious scaredy cat. The garage called, its darkness alive. I even made my husband walk me to the bathroom in the middle of the night. We ventured, flashlight in hand. We got a flashlight and shined it into the garage. The dread was a weight pressing down. We couldn't help feeling this very, very weird dread and fear. emanating from the garage. The house spoke again. Hey, I heard someone say, "Ding dong." The dogs howled, sensing what we couldn't. The dogs, we were also dog-sitting, went nuts, barking at the front door. No one was there, but the air was thick. Although there was no one there, a touch grazed my arm. Cold and fleeting, something brushed up against my arm. A figure moved, vanishing around a corner. I saw a person walking the other way, down the hallway. The spirits were restless. One of the dogs saw an orb fly out of a room we were in. The dog's fear mirrored mine. The dog definitely saw it, too, and he looked freaked out. Objects defied us, moving on their own. I dropped my razor on the ground. It reappeared, mocking logic. It was back on the countertop across the bathroom. Nate's toothbrush vanished, then returned. My husband dropped his toothbrush. The house played with us, relentless. The weight broke me. I was in tears, asking my husband why I'm so perceptive. The spirits chose me, their gaze unyielding. I've been haunted in the past by negative spirits. I was no stranger to their touch, but this was too much. I know I probably sound like a cuckoo. As a grad student, I clung to reason, but it failed me. I get really fearful whenever paranormal activity starts acting up. The house was alive, and we were its guests. We left, but the echoes stayed. I searched X for Hawaii hauntings, finding tales of orbs and shadow men tied to ancient lands. The islands hold spirits, restless and old. I avoid empty houses now, fear the dark corners. Some places invite you in, but they never let you leave. The unseen guests are still there, watching, waiting for the next soul to claim. Story number 6, The Anubis Nightmare. The apartment was a cocoon, a quiet refuge from the chaos of college life. I am a skeptic in general and don't buy into the paranormal stuff, but something happened to me in college that I can't quite explain, to the point that I remind myself a few times every year that it actually happened. Logic was my anchor. But that night tested its hold. I was sleeping over at my girlfriend's house, and for a few nights I had been having a very similar nightmare. Her place was familiar, a second home where we shared late nights and laughter. The fact I was having nightmares at all was odd in itself. Dreams were rare for me, fleeting shadows I seldom recalled. I rarely remembered my dreams at that point in my life, but suddenly I was having them all the time. The nightmares were a plague, vivid and relentless. The dreams themselves were terrifying. Each night they clawed at my mind, leaving me shaken. I don't remember all the details, but I clearly remember the source of my fear. The image was burned into me, a specter I couldn't shake. It was very tall and spindly with thin arms and legs and the head of a dog. Its form was unnatural, a grotesque parody of life. It kind of looked like an Egyptian Anubis. The dog-headed figure was a god of death, its presence ancient and menacing. I remember that it would sort of dance towards me in my dream with its arms waving wildly above its head. The dream was a ritual, its movements hypnotic, almost like it had one of those air-driven advertisements that they put in front of car lots to get your attention as you drive by. The comparison was absurd, but its dance was chilling. Sounds dumb when I type it out, but it was scary enough that it still fills me with a sense of dread. The fear was primal, lingering long after waking. And and we're talking 15 years later here. The memory was a scar, vivid and raw each night. The Anubis figure grew closer, its eyes gleaming with intent. All of this is explainable until one night I was having the dream again and woke up right around the time I usually did. The night turned predator, its calm a lie. Only this time I was awoke not just with residual terror, but also with an overwhelming sense that something was very wrong and that I was in imminent danger. The fear was tangible, a weight pressing on my chest. I looked over at my girlfriend just in time to see her eyes snap open. Her eyes were wide, mirroring my panic. We look at each other and just know to get out. The shared instinct was electric, unspoken but certain. We flip on the lights, and here's where I begin to double doubt myself and have to constantly remind myself that, yes, it did happen, and froze. The light was a revelation, exposing the impossible. All around the room are my girlfriend's hats. The room was a stage, its props rearranged by an unseen hand. There's one on the lamp, a few on the floor, one on the exercise bike, one on the desk. And when we went to sleep, they were all in a box. The hats were a violation, scattered like offerings. Each one was a taunt, defying logic. We stood there a moment in shock. The room was silent, but its air was heavy. All the while inside my head, I just get the feeling that we need to get out. The urge was primal, a scream in my mind, but we don't say a word. Silence bound us, fear our only language. We just looked at each other, both white as a sheet. The apartment was no longer safe, its walls complicit. We turned and got the hell out of her apartment, not even pausing to put shoes on. Our feet were bare, the floor cold as we fled, and we didn't sleep over there again. The apartment was tainted, a place we couldn't trust. I never had that dream again. The nightmares stopped, but the memory lingered, and to this day, I have no idea what the hell to think about it, but I don't want to forget it either. The mystery was a weight, a truth I carried. I searched X for tales of nightmares bleeding into reality, finding stories of objects moved by unseen forces. Some spoke of Anubis-like figures, others of homes that rejected their occupants. The apartment was a memory, but the Anubis nightmare followed me, a reminder of a night when fear became real, etched into my restless mind. Story number 7, The White Ford Stalker. The Tennessee night is a velvet curtain, heavy with the hum of the Cherokee National Forest. I'm 14, restless in our quiet house at the edge of the woods, where the trees seem to whisper secrets. This incident happened when I was 14. Dad's gone, guiding rafters through white waters, leaving me with my sister, 7 years older, and our stepmom. My dad, at the time, a whitewater raft guide, would often be out of town during peak seasons, leaving me, my older sister of 7 years, and my stepmother at home, nestled in front of the Cherokee National Forest in East Tennessee. The town is small, sleepy, but tonight it feels alive with something sinister. It was later in the evening of a Friday night that me and my sister decided we wanted Subway before they closed. The road to Subway is too quiet. So we asked our stepmom, and she said, "Sure." We pile into the car, the neon lights of the restaurant a beacon in the dark. My sister and I got into the car and went to Subway, which was only a few miles. At an intersection, a car slides behind us, its headlights piercing. As we pulled out from the stop sign at an intersection, I noticed a car get behind us. It's just another local. I think not unusual, just that we lived in a sleepy small town, so maybe we knew them. But the white Ford Probe feels wrong. Its presence heavy. It's following us. We reach the shabby strip mall, Subway glowing beside a darkened grocery store. We arrive at Subway, which is in a shabby shopping center. The Ford pulls into the unlit lot, where teens sometimes linger. The car pulls into the dark, unlit parking lot where a lot of local high schoolers hang out. I assume it's a kid, but my gut twists. I quickly thought it was just another teen hanging out, but I was wrong. We grab our food, but the car's headlights flare as we open our doors. I notice the car's headlights as we're opening our car doors. I tell my sister. I then mentioned it to my sister, and she shrugged it off. It won't let go. We drive off, taking a winding route home to lose it. We drove away from Subway to the exit of the parking lot, and the unknown driver of this white Ford Probe fled across the parking lot, running over to the curb to keep behind us. The Ford races to follow, tires screeching. This definitely scared my older sister. We weave through back roads, heartbeats loud. There's multiple ways to get to our house. So we took the more intricate and confusing way to someone who doesn't know where they're going. It stays close, relentless. The vehicle kept up with us until a few turns before our neighborhood, then it's gone. We get closer to our house, and since we lost the follower, we figured we were being paranoid. It knows where we live. We pull into our driveway, laughing nervously, telling stepmom our tale. We get to our driveway and walk inside and kind of jokingly tell our story to our stepmom. Headlights sweep across the window. In the midst of it, we see headlights from a car in front of the house. It's the Ford idling outside. My sister looks out the window. It's the white Probe. We freeze, terror sinking in. We're scared at this point because this person either was very aware of where we lived or was a neighbor that we weren't aware of. It lingers, then vanishes. They sit outside the house for what seems like a really long time. And before my stepmom gets her phone to call my father to ask if he would have any idea who this was, they drive off. The threat returns. We eat uneasy. The Ford haunting our thoughts. We sit and eat our food uncomfortably, but try to shake it off. It reappears 4 more times, taunting us. We see the old vehicle outside again 4 more times. Dad, from Florida. Can't help. My father called. He wasn't sure who it was, but assured us we were okay. Morning brings no peace. My stepmom had to work the next day. Since it was the weekend, my sister and I slept in late. We play video games, trying to forget. We decided to play some video games. A knock at the door shatters the calm. There was a knock at the front door. He's here. The knocking grows louder, urgent. Nobody should have been knocking, so we didn't answer. And it kept going and getting harder. From the living room, we see him, a man, staring through the kitchen's floor-to-ceiling window. You could see into the kitchen. The knocking subsides, and my sister is trying to find her phone to call our stepmom and the police. As she's doing that, we both see this man peering inside our large kitchen window. He meets our eyes, then flees into the forest. As we make eye contact, he turns and walks up the hill into the national forest. A note on the door reads, "I wasn't planning on hurting anyone." Whoever this was would have left a note on our door. The poorly written note that was written on a torn corner of a piece of sticky paper pad that read, "I wasn't planning on hurting anyone." He's not gone. Police find nothing but a carving on a tree near our house. Our initials, scratched deep. What did he want? The police arrive several minutes later, and so does our stepmom. They urge vigilance. They did a quick scan and said they didn't see anyone, and that we really just need to keep everything locked up for a while. We moved soon after, but the fear stays. We surely move thereafter this event. The forest hides him, and others like him. Is he still out there, driving his white Ford, watching? Story number 8, The Stalker on the Upper East Side. The city never sleeps, but its shadows watch too closely. I used to live in New York City in a tiny apartment full of 6 other people and me. So, 7 in total. I was small, young, and alone when a stranger's gaze locked onto me. His eyes burned through the coffee shop's chaos, marking me as his prey. That day, the streets of New York became a maze, and I was hunted. A man walked in, unfamiliar, his presence a crack in the routine. Earlier in the day that I closed with my coworker Fatima, a man had come in and ordered coffee, which isn't unusual in itself, because I worked in a coffee shop. He wasn't a regular, and his stare was relentless, chilling my spine. What made him stand out was that I had never seen him before, and neither had my coworkers. He lingered, his eyes never leaving me. A predator in plain sight. The city's pulse hid his intent, but I felt it growing. His stare wasn't casual. It was a weight, a promise of something dark. I was noticing that he was staring bullets at me. Every move I made, he watched, his presence a shadow that wouldn't fade. I could feel his eyes on me when I turned around to grab people's orders. I told him to leave, but he stayed. His intent clear. The coffee shop became a cage, and I was trapped. Closing time came, but he was waiting just outside the door. I go out, and guess who's there? That's right, the weirdo. I walked home, bagels in hand, but his footsteps echoed behind me. As I'm walking, I can't check the feeling that I'm being followed, and decided to turn quickly and without warning to see if I am. He was there, hiding badly, a stalker in the city's veins. The streets weren't safe, and I was running out of time. Bagel Guy stood by me, but the creep closed in, relentless. I finally reach where Bagel Guy usually is and say hi and hand him his share of bagels. I called Moo, my giant protector, and prayed he'd come. Moo was the only person I could reach. He charged through the night, a force to end the chase. The stalker met his match, and I was saved, but the fear stayed. New York City was my world, a chaotic symphony of dreams and danger. We dubbed ourselves the Team. I was the youngest at night and was treated like all little sisters, as everyone else was 26 to 35. I shared a cramped apartment with 6 others, a makeshift family in a concrete jungle. At 5'2" and barely 115 pounds, I was the smallest, a target in a city that didn't care. I'm also pretty tiny, standing at 5'2" and not even 15 gubbies soaking wet. My roommate, Moo, a 65 weightlifter from Africa, was my shield, a gentle giant I trusted. This particular instance involved my giant 6'5" weightlifter roommate from Africa that I called Moo. I worked at a tiny coffee shop on the Upper East Side, a place of regulars and routine. During the summer, I worked at a little hole-in-the-wall coffee shop on the Upper East Side. The neighborhood wasn't as safe as it seemed, its polished streets hiding a high crime rate. Contrary to popular belief, the highest crime rate was the Upper East Side. I closed the shop a few nights a week with Fatima, a co-worker who despised me. I would close on a few nights out the week with another worker that absolutely hated my guts called Fatima. Her hostility was a constant, but I endured it to take home unsold bagels, saving them from the trash. I only agreed to close on the night she worked the late shift because I got to bring home the bagels that wouldn't sell and would give these out, otherwise they'd be thrown away. On my 30-minute walks home, I shared them with a homeless man I called Bagel Guy, who nicknamed me Coffee Girl. On my walk home, which was about a 30-minute walk, I would give a bag of bagels to a nice homeless man. I called him Bagel Guy, and he called me Coffee Girl. That day, a stranger entered, his presence jarring. He wasn't a regular, his face unknown to the shop's familiar crowd. The coffee shop was one of those places with regulars that would have their orders being made the second they stepped into the door, and everyone knew them by name, or at least recognized them. I brushed it off, thinking he was new to the area. I brushed it off as maybe he was exploring or had recently moved into the area. The man's stare was a weight, growing heavier as the day wore on. He didn't just glance, he watched, his eyes tracking my every move. I felt it even with my back turned, a chill that wouldn't fade. At first, I wasn't too worried. After all, I lived in New York City, and there was an overtly fair amount of awkward and unusual characters. But this was different. His gaze was relentless, predatory. Only this guy was blatantly staring bullets at me. When he ordered, I tried to make small talk, hoping to ease the tension. When it was his turn to order, I mentioned that I hadn't seen him in the shop before, and he replied that he had stopped in because he saw me at the window. His words were odd, too personal for a stranger. Okay, again, it's New York City. People do weird stuff. He paid, but didn't leave, lingering at the counter, seeking my attention. He ordered, he paid, but he kept hanging around the counter, trying to get my attention and to speak to me. I deflected, my voice firm but polite, urging him to sit or go. I politely told him that I was busy and that he'd need to grab a seat or clear out because I needed to work. The shop was small, its few tables claimed by regulars or staff. Mind you, this place was literally like a closet. The only people that would ever sit at the two-point tables we had were the guy that cleaned and ran our pickups, or one of the 3 people that had been coming to the shop since the dawn of time itself. He stayed, sometimes outside, sometimes at a table, never gone for long. This strange guy hung around nearly all till day, sometimes outside or at the table when a seat was available. But he was never out of sight for more than 30 to 40 minutes. Unease grew, and I confided in Fatima. Despite her disdain, I was starting to get weirded out at this point that I voluntarily talked to Fatima even though she despised me. She'd berated me before, her complaints loud and public. So much so to the point she'd yell at me in front of customers and complain loudly to the managers about me. I told her about the man's persistence, but she shrugged it off. I told her the weird guy had been bugging me all day and didn't listen when I told him that I couldn't just loiter. Fatima didn't care. Closing time brought no relief. He was still there, waiting. I stepped out to retrieve the shop's sign and bench, and he was sitting, watching. When closing time came around, we would usually be done around 11:30 to midnight. I was tasked with going to grab our little sign and bench that we had outside. I told him we were closed, my voice steady despite my fear. I tell him that we are closing and that I needed to bring the bench inside. He left, turning the corner, but his absence felt temporary. He gets off the bench and walks off. I watch him turn the corner at the end of the street, but I'm still weirded out. I asked Fatima to stay, hoping for safety in numbers, but she refused. I mentioned it to Fatima and asked her if she'd stay with me because I wanted my roommate Moo to come and get me. But she doesn't care. She locked up and headed uptown, leaving me alone. I grab my bags of leftover bagels and she locks up and gets out of there towards one of the subway stations uptown. My path was downtown, a 30-minute walk through the city's veins. My apartment was downtown, so I couldn't have walked with her anyway. I started walking, bagels weighing me down, my senses sharp. A feeling crept in, like eyes on my back, unshakable. I turned suddenly, catching him in a doorway, poorly hidden. Turns out I was. Every time I turn around, this guy would quickly try to hide in a doorway like the stereotypical creeper in a movie. I tried to lose him, weaving through crowds, doubling back, but he persisted, doubling back, switching avenues, and trying to lose him by hiding in groups of people didn't help. Panic rose, my hands full, my phone out of reach. I know many people are going to think, why didn't I call someone? You see, my hands were full, and I was trying not to trip or panic. The city's noise drowned my fear, but it couldn't erase his shadow. I pushed on, heart racing, praying for safety, for escape. The streets felt endless, each step a gamble against his pursuit. I reached Bagel Guy's corner, a beacon in the dark. His familiar face was a lifeline, his presence a shield. I'd always be bringing him bagels and we'd have a chat. I handed him his share, my voice trembling as I confessed. I tell him that I'm being followed and tell him that he's hiding badly in a doorway. He saw the man, his eyes narrowing, and told me to stay. Bagel Guy sees the creep and tells me to stay where I am and to call someone. I fumbled with my phone, pretending to answer a call, and reached Moo. I spoke in shorthand, explaining the threat, my location. Moo was far, but he was coming. His voice a promise. Moo was still a ways downtown, but said that he was hurrying. Bagel Guy offered to walk with me, his kindness a shield against the night. And I asked Bagel Guy if he'd walk with me to meet my roommate because I was scared out of my mind. And he agreed and said it was no problem. We started downtown, Bagel Guy at my side, the creep still trailing. His attempts to hide were clumsy, but he was closer now, bolder. We start our walk downtown towards my roommate, and the whole time the creeper is still following. He's even doing the whole horribly fail at trying to hide stick-ick. Fear gripped me, tears threatening as Moo remained out of sight. But he's getting closer and closer every time we turn to look. But there's still no sign of Moo, and I want to cry. The city's pulse was indifferent, its crowds thinning as we walked. Each glance back showed him nearer, his intent clearer. Bagel Guy's presence kept me grounded, his calm a contrast to my dread. I clung to hope, to Moo's promise. As the night tightened its grip, the stalker's shadow loomed, a threat I couldn't outrun alone. A figure emerged, massive and unstoppable. Moo! Charging through the night. Finally, we see a beast of a man just barreling towards us, and I immediately recognize it as Moo. He didn't slow his eyes, but he locked on the creep hiding in a doorway. I guess he had seen the guy following me, and now Bagel Guy, because Moo doesn't stop as he reaches us. He just kept on running. Bagel Guy and I jogged after him, my heart pounding with relief. Igel and I decided to jog towards where Moo was heading, and I was glad I did. Moo reached the man, shoving him against the wall, his voice thunder. When Moo reached the creep, he shoved past him against the wall where he was hiding and confronted him about following his little sister. The stalker's bravado vanished, his fear palpable. I guess I should note that I looked nothing like Moo. The creepy guy is now the one scared out of his mind. Moo's rage was controlled, a warning etched in every word. He has this 6'5" ripped guy that's nearly breathing fire at him. He threatened the man, promising consequences if he returned. Moo threatened the guy that if he catches him following us again after this, or following me, or coming to the coffee shop, that the creep is going to regret it severely. I watched, stunned. Moo, my gentle giant, was a force unleashed. I was a little taken back. Moo is a giant teddy bear, but he's not someone you want to be on the bad side of. The creep fled, his shadow swallowed by the city. Moo turned to Bagel Guy, gratitude in his eyes. After Moo was done scaring the guy, he thanked Bagel Guy many times for watching out for me and hoped he enjoyed his bagels. We walked home, Moo's presence a shield, the night softer now. Then Moo and I got home. The stalker never returned, his threat ended by Moo's fury. Unfortunately, I was never bothered by that creep again. The city hasn't changed, but I have. I walk faster now, eyes scanning the crowds, bagels still in the hand for Bagel Guy. The coffee shop feels smaller, its corners hiding potential threats. I see the stalker's eyes in strangers, hear his footsteps in quiet moments. Moo and Bagel Guy saved me, but the fear lingers, a scar from that night. Story number 9, The Shadow on the Roof. The roof wasn't just a hideout, it was a trap. In an old Chicago building, its bricks steeped in history, Ethan and his friends claimed an apartment owned by one of their parents. The walls whispered secrets, and something darker waited above. My friends and I had an apartment in the building his parents owned. The structure was ancient, laced with sealed tunnels from Al Capone's era. It was an old building in Chicago that had tunnels that Al Capone and company had built that his dad blocked off. The attic, a lightless maze, was their path to the roof. We used the roof as a place to go to smoke cigarettes. The climb to the roof was a ritual, lit only by flickering phone screens. You had to get through the attic to get there, though there were no lights. So the only lights we had were from our terrible brick and flip phones. Ethan and his friend Manny planned a quick smoke, but Ethan paused to use the apartment's bathroom. One day, my friend Manny and I were going up to smoke, and I told Manny I needed to go to the toilet. So I did that in the apartment, alone in the attic. The air grew heavy, as if someone watched. When I was done, I went up and felt like there was someone there. Ethan called out, thinking Manny was pranking him. It was pretty common for us to mess with each other. So I said, "Manny, I know it." The shadow moved, a figure too real to be a trick, and I followed this shadow figure, thinking it was him. Ethan chased it, shouting, his voice echoing in the dark. I yelled, "Stop playing! I know it's you." Then Manny's voice answered from downstairs as I followed. Then I heard from downstairs Money say, "What?" Panic gripped Ethan, his heart racing as he realized he was alone with something else. I was terrified. I had just followed him to a corner. He fled, the attic's darkness chasing him. I ran back downstairs and asked if he was there. Manny was below, chatting with his girlfriend, oblivious. He was talking to his girlfriend at the time, and I told him I didn't want to go upstairs. Ethan refused to return. The shadow's presence burned into his mind. I know what I saw. Others dismissed it as his own shadow, but Ethan knew better. His flip phone's light was too weak. People always tried to say maybe the shadow was your own. That is not possible because I owned at the time a Motorola flip phone, and I was only holding that in front of me. It was a shadow person, a thing that wasn't human. I saw a shadow person, and I know others have too. Ethan's nights changed. The roof no longer a refuge. He dreamed of the attic, a figure lurking in its corners. He researched the building, finding tales of unexplained sightings, workers who'd vanished in the old tunnels. Was the shadow tied to the Capone era or something older, bound to the building? He installed a lock on his door, avoided the attic, and kept his phone's light on at night. One evening, he heard footsteps above, but no one was there. He joined a local paranormal group, sharing his story. Others had seen shadows in old Chicago buildings, figures that watched and waited. The shadow on the roof wasn't just a moment, it was a warning. Story number 10, The Unseen Embrace. You're alone in bed, the room dark, the air still cool, then the mattress dips behind you as if someone just sat down, but no one's there. What's with you in the dark? A trick of the mind or something real? Its presence pressing closer, watching you. You freeze, heart pounding as it lies down, its unseen arm wrapping around you, heavy and cold. This isn't just a restless night, it's an encounter with something that doesn't belong, something that feels too alive. You escape sleep, but the memory lingers. Will it return, or is it still there, waiting for you to close your eyes? The apartment complex I called home through middle and high school was a maze of creaky floors and thin walls, buzzing with strange occurrences that neighbors often whispered about. I lived in an apartment complex for 7 years, middle to high school, and experienced a lot of weird stuff with many witnesses, but nothing unsettled me like that one night. But the most unnerving was this. I was settling into bed, the familiar comfort of my room wrapping around me. I was laying in bed just getting comfortable. Facing the wall, I felt the mattress sink behind me, as if someone had sat down. I was rolled onto my side facing the wall when I felt someone sit on the bed behind me. Thinking it was my mom checking on me, I turned, but the room was empty. I thought perhaps my mom had come in, and I turned to look, but there was no one. The dip in the bed remained, heavy and real. I could still feel the dip in my bed. No one was there. The door was closed. The light was off. I was totally alone. I couldn't move. Fear gripped me, rooting me to the spot as I stared at the wall, trying to muster the courage to reach for the lamp. I was freaked out so much that I rolled back over and stared at the wall, trying to get the courage to reach over and turn the lamp on. Then it happened. The weight shifted, as if whatever it was lay down beside me, an unseen arm pressing against my side, while suddenly I feel whatever was sitting there lay down and put an arm around me. I felt the pressure of an arm on my side. I felt the dip of weight behind me. It was holding me. My breath caught. Too terrified to turn, too scared to face what might be there. I was too scared to move at that point, since I didn't want to turn around and see what was there. Somehow, exhaustion overtook fear, and I drifted into sleep. Eventually, I fell asleep and nothing strange happened the next morning, but the feeling never left. The morning brought no answers, only a lingering dread. What had been in my bed? The apartment had always felt off. Doors creaking open, shadows flickering where they shouldn't. But this was different. Intimate. Personal. I checked the room, the door still locked. No signs of entry. Was it in my head? My siblings had stories too, whispers in the halls, cold spots in corners. I began avoiding my bed, sleeping on the couch when I could. Was it tied to the apartment or to me? One night, I felt it again, a faint pressure, but I bolted upright, and it vanished. It knew I was awake. I researched the building's history, uncovering tales of a tenant who died in our unit, their presence rumored to linger. Was that what held me? Neighbors spoke of footsteps at night, of objects moving on their own. My mother found an old photo tucked behind a baseboard, showing a figure I couldn't identify, their face blurred. Who were they? The complex felt heavier, its walls closing in. I left for college eventually, but the memory of that embrace, cold, unseen, deliberate, followed me. Some things don't let go. Story number 11, The Shadow of Sam. The streets were never safe, not when his eyes were on me. I moved a lot growing up. Each new town was a fresh start, a chance to leave the ghosts of the past behind. But this time, something followed me, something that wore a human face but felt like a predator. The high school's halls buzzed with life, but a chill clung to me, a warning I couldn't shake. My friends were my shield, but even they couldn't see the shadow creeping closer. His name was Sam, and he was everywhere. He towered over us, a giant with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. By the time freshman year of high school came around, I had moved 7 or so times and was about a year and a half into my most recent move. I had found a pretty close group of friends in middle school, and we all went to high school together. I met him through one of those close friends. They were in a band together. But Sam wasn't just a friend. He was a storm waiting to break. His presence was a weight heavy and unyielding, and even though he was almost 4 years older than us, we welcomed him into our group. Sam was easily twice my size, tall and heavy-set, and originally kind of intimidating. His laugh was loud, his stories wild, but there was something off, a glint in his gaze that made my skin crawl. I should have listened to that instinct, the one that screamed to run, but I was young, desperate for connection, blind to the danger. The school became my refuge, but even there, he found me. I kind of had a bad home life, and I spent as much time as I could at school. sometimes hanging around the school campus until 600 or 7 at night with this friend group. The dusk painted the world in shades of gray, and the campus felt like a sanctuary until it didn't. Sam's shadow stretched long, his footsteps a rhythm I couldn't escape. I told myself he was just being friendly, just part of the group. I was wrong. That night, the air turned cold, and so did his mask. One slightly colder evening, Sam offered to walk me home since the others had already left. I just thought he was being a gentleman. His offer seemed kind, a gesture of protection in the darkening streets, but his eyes held something else, a hunger I didn't yet understand. I nodded, ignoring the knot in my stomach, and let him walk beside me. His bulk a looming presence in the twilight. Turbid. The walk was quiet at first, the crunch of gravel under our shoes the only sound. He mentioned something from a previous move where he lived in California, where he didn't walk a friend home and something horrible happened. He left it at that, and I let him walk me home. His voice was low, the story vague but heavy, like a warning wrapped in regret. I brushed it off, chalking it up to his dramatic flair. We got a lot closer after that and bonded over both living in California and exchanged numbers. He would message me late into the night about his depression and self-harm, and I just wanted to help. His texts were a flood, raw, desperate, pulling at my empathy. I stayed up, typing replies, trying to be the friend he needed. A few months later, he tried asking me out. This was a big romantic gesture. He learned a Disney song on the ukulele and sang it to me in the cafeteria. The room spun with laughter and cheers, but my heart sank. But I was already dating someone, and when I turned him down, he got angry and freaky and quiet, twitchy kind of angry. His silence was worse than words, so I felt bad. I tried to smooth things over, to keep the group intact, but Sam's eyes changed. I started seeing him everywhere. We were still friends. We still hung out in our groups. But his presence was no longer casual. But I would pass him on the streets, walking somewhere, and a few minutes later, I'd see that he had changed direction and start following me. His steps were deliberate, always just far enough to claim coincidence. He would walk me to classes by following me and passing periods at distance. The hallways, once safe, became a maze where he was always a step behind. I started to minimize the group time we spent together, and he would follow me more and more. My friends noticed, their laughter fading when he was near. I had friends meet me at each class and walk me to my next one because I was starting to feel unsafe. And he knew where I lived. My home, my sanctuary, was no longer mine. The story started then, whispered through mutual friends. Then he started to talk, not to me, but to a mutual friend about the one girl in California who he tried to walk home. At first, it was just a name, my name. At first, she just shared my name, some crazy coincidence. Then details crept in. Then she had the same brown curly hair and blue eyes, and every time he rambled about her, she became more and more like me. His words painted a mirror, a twisted reflection of me. And then he said, "What happened?" Over literal weeks, this fantasy evolved. They were walking home and they were jumped by some guy with a knife. It was a robbery gone wrong on her birthday, January 24th, which happened to be mine as well. She died horribly, and he couldn't react in time. She bled out in his arms. Sarah, who has brown curly hair with blue eyes, shares my name, my birthday, and sounds just like me, bled out in his arms. Each retelling was a knife, carving my fear deeper. Each retelling added more and more detail, and this guy, with his sick fantasy about my death, would follow me around and knew where I lived. I stopped walking alone, my eyes scanning every corner. My boyfriend was abusive mentally and physically, but I stayed as close to him as I could whenever I could, because if the worst happened, I knew for sure he could throw a punch. His violence was a shield, flawed but necessary. I never felt safe at school or in a little town, especially when walking home from the dark. Then came the breakdown. One day at school, he had a breakdown, freaked out and ran out of the school in a panic. The halls echoed with his shouts, a chaos that drew every eye. I was sent after him and found him curled up on the floor. I got closer. I knew about his anxiety and depression, and my safety aside, I wanted to make sure he was okay. His sobs were raw, his body shaking, and for a moment, I saw the boy beneath the monster. It was then that he told me this horrifying story that I had been hearing from mutual friends with added detail. We had been walking home from a concert in California. We passed a dark alley, and a homeless man came out with a rusty knife and asked for anything valuable. I fumbled for my phone but didn't have anything else on me, and he thought I was calling the cops. He stabbed me once, twice, again, and again. And Sam stood there horrified. He saw red and grabbed a broken glass bottle near my body and attacked the homeless man and killed him with his own knife. He told me he killed someone. My stalker killed someone. His words were a confession, real or not, and they shattered me. It didn't matter how messed up he was anymore. I didn't care if it was a fantasy or real. I didn't care how it would affect his mental health anymore. I wanted to go to the police. I was scared for my life. My hands shook as I told my friends, their faces pale, their voices urgent. My friends convinced me to go to the school counselor first. That morning, we went and told them everything. The stalking, the stories, how he admitted to murder. And that was the reason they moved from California. How I was afraid for my life and wanted to call the police. The counselor's office was sterile, her face a mask of skepticism. The counselor didn't take us seriously. She went to the principal, and the principal, not a mental health expert, called Sam in to talk about the accusation. The principal then informed me that he did not think that Sam had any kind of mental illness or that I was in any danger. And that was that. The dismissal was a betrayal. A door slammed shut. I lost faith in adults, gave up on going to the police, and stayed with my friends, walking me in between classes, hiding behind my abusive boyfriend. I looked behind me every step my walk home that year. The town, once small and familiar, was a labyrinth of fear. The counselors ended up gaslighting us to the point where this all feels like a fever dream now. And I think I would have doubted it myself were it not for my journal entries recording the events of my growing panic and the similar stories from my friend group. And just to clarify, I don't think anyone died in California. I think he's a pathological liar. And he was so deep in a fantasy that he had convinced himself it was real. Now, I wasn't physically hurt, but it was emotional scarring, and the threat he posed was 100% real to me. The journals were my proof, pages filled with dread, a record of a year lived in shadow. So, to Sam, let's not meet again. The fear didn't end with a high school. I moved again. A new tune, a new start. But Sam's shadow lingered. I checked X, found stories of others stalked by figures from their past, their lives upended by obsession. One post described a man who followed a girl for years, leaving notes, watching from afar. Another spoke of a liar who wove tales so vivid they felt real, manipulating everyone around them. Each story was a mirror, reflecting my own. I changed my number, my routes, my habits. My friends from that group drifted, some unable to face the weight of what happened. My boyfriend left, his own demons too heavy to carry. But the journals stayed, tucked in a box I rarely opened. When I did, the words were a punch, dates, times, Sam's stories. My fears scrawled in shaky handwriting, they grounded me, proof that it wasn't a dream. The town faded into memory, but not the feeling of being watched. I avoided dark streets, kept my curtains drawn. At night, I'd lie awake, listening for footsteps, for the creak of a door, and once, in a new city, I saw a man on the street, tall, heavy-set, his gait familiar. My heart stopped, but it wasn't him. It never was. Yet the fear was the same, a scar that never healed. Years later, a friend from the group reached out. She'd heard Sam had moved again, somewhere far. His life a mess of broken relationships and lies. No one knew if the California story was true, but it didn't matter. He'd built a world where I was the ghost, the girl who died in his arms. And that was enough to haunt me. I burned the journals, hoping to let go. But some nights, I still feel his eyes, watching from the dark, waiting for me to step into his story. Story number 12, The Hidden Card. The Starbucks was a haven of noise, espresso machines hissing, customers chattering. But today, a shadow hung over it. My friend Jess worked the counter, her eyes scanning the crowd. There are usually homeless people in that area, and most are relatively harmless. But one man stood out, his grizzled face unreadable, his presence like a storm cloud. I felt a chill watching him, as if he carried something darker than the dirt on his clothes. Jess whispered he'd been lurking for hours. What was he hiding? And why did he feel so wrong? The man's gaze was heavy, locking onto the staff with unnerving calm. She and her co-workers noticed a grisly-looking man hovering around and soon saw that he had a hunting knife in his belt. The knife glinted at his hip, legal but threatening. Jess's hands trembled as she poured coffee, her instincts screaming danger. He approached, asking to borrow her phone, his voice low and rough. Why did he need it, and what was he planning in the quiet of the bathroom? Jess handed over her phone, her heart pounding, and watched him vanish into the restroom. He borrowed an employee's phone and went to the bathroom. The door clicked shut, and the shop seemed to hold its breath. Minutes dragged, each one heavier, as if the air itself knew something was wrong. When he returned, he gave back the phone and left without a word. What had he gone in there? And what had he left behind? Jess steeled herself and checked the bathroom, expecting needles or worse. The employee checks the bathroom, expecting to find drugs stashed somewhere. She searched under the sink, her fingers brushing cold metal, a PVC pipe. Inside, something rattled, small and hard, hidden with purpose. She pulled it out, an SD card, unassuming but heavy with secrets. What was on it, and why had it been hidden so carefully? Back at the counter, Jess plugged the card into her laptop, her breath shallow, checking under the sink and inside a PVC pipe. She finds an SD card, plugs it in, and it is completely full of porn. The screen filled with images, graphic, relentless, wrong. Her stomach churned, not just at the content, but at the fear of what it meant. She yanked the card out, hands shaking, and called the police. Was this a glimpse into something far worse? A network hiding in plain sight? The police arrived quickly, their faces grim as Jess handed over the card. I'm told they noped out of there immediately and called the police, so the details aren't known. They sealed off the bathroom, questioning the staff. But the man was long gone, vanished into the city's underbelly. Jess couldn't shake the image of his knife, the way his eyes had lingered, as if he knew what he'd left behind. The cops didn't share much, but their urgency told her enough. The card wasn't just porn, it was evidence of something sinister. She started noticing details she'd missed. The man's worn backpack, the way he'd scanned the shop like a predator. The other baristas whispered about similar incidents, hidden stashes, strange customers, items left in odd places. Was this Starbucks a hub for something darker? A place where secrets were traded under the guise of coffee orders? Jess began checking the bathroom daily, her hands cold as she searched for more cards, more clues. Each empty pipe felt like a reprieve, but the fear lingered. A shadow that followed her home. She couldn't sleep, haunted by the thought of what else might be on that card. Images too vile to imagine, lives ruined, captured in pixels. What if the man came back, knowing she'd found his secret? The shop's bright lights felt dimmer now, its warmth a facade. Jess started carrying a small knife of her own, tucked in her apron, a desperate shield against the unknown. She told me about the underground networks, dead drops, coded exchanges, people trading horrors in plain sight. I can't stop imagining the terrible underground network of people using dead drops to trade what has to be horrifying and almost certainly inappropriate sexual material. The thought made my skin crawl, a reminder that evil didn't need darkness to thrive. It could hide in a crowded coffee shop. Jess quit soon after, unable to face the bathroom's locked door or the customers' faces, wondering who else might be part of it. The Starbucks stayed open, but she never went back, afraid of what she might see in the crowd. I drove by it once, its sign glowing, but I couldn't go in. The place felt tainted, a stage for secrets I didn't want to uncover. I started researching, digging into stories of similar drops, cards, drifts, even coded notes left in public places. The internet was full of them, libraries, gas stations, parks, all part of a web stretching across cities. Some forums whispered about content far worse than porn, material that made the SD card seem tame. I couldn't read more, my mind reeling from the possibilities. Jess moved away, but she still checks her locks twice. Her trust in strangers broken. She dreams of the man sometimes, his knife flashing, his voice asking for her phone again. The police never updated her. The case swallowed by bureaucracy or something worse. I wonder if they've found him, or if he's still out there, leaving cards for others to find. The shop's new staff probably don't know, pouring lattes over a history they'll never suspect. But I can't forget Jess's voice, the way it shook as she described the card, the moment she realized what she'd uncovered. I avoid public restrooms now, my eyes scanning for odd pipes, strange customers. What if I find something, a card that pulls me into that world? The city feels different, its corners hiding drops I'll never see but know are there. How many pass through our lives unnoticed, carrying secrets that could break us? I shared it here, I had to, but it doesn't ease the weight. The SD card is gone, but its shadow stays, a warning that some truths are better left hidden. Have you ever found something that made you question the world around you? Story number 13, The Silent Watcher. When places feel empty, but they're never truly alone. Our new double-wide mobile home sat on a patch of land untouched by any other house. 1,000 feet from the nearest neighbor. The air was clean, the silence vast, and the stars burned bright above the open fields. My wife and I had built a life there, a quiet one, free from the weight of history, or so we thought. In light of this, you would not think that our house would be a likely location for a haunting, but something lingered in that space, something that didn't need a past to make itself known. The night was ordinary until it wasn't, as was usual, though we had left the light on in the bathroom out of habit, and it cast a glow through our open bedroom door, weakly lighting the room. The faint light spilled across the floor, a soft anchor in the dark. We had gone to bed, the house quiet without the children, who were away for the night. Some time had passed after we had laid down, and I was unable to sleep. I lay there, eyes tracing the ceiling, my wife's steady breathing suggesting she was asleep. But the air felt heavier, charged with a presence I couldn't name. It came without warning, silent as a thought. I began to become aware of her presence that I could not explain other than to say I knew we were not alone. My mind fought it, chalking it up to imagination. But the feeling grew sharper, undeniable. Suddenly and silently, a figure moved in through our bedroom door and proceeded parallel to our bed in a smooth gliding motion, then rounding the corner of our bed and took up a fixed position at the foot of it. It wasn't human, not quite. The entity can best be described as something that had the appearance of black smoke or a shadow. It hovered, more solid than mist, but less than flesh, its edges blurring into the dim light. Some things you feel before you fear. Strangely, I seemed to be acutely aware that this entity was conscious of us and was intently watching us while I was laying there watching it. It didn't move, didn't speak, but its presence was a conversation of its own. The strangest thing about this whole situation was my complete lack of fear. Although I was acutely aware that some being had entered our room, and there was no doubt in my mind that it was absolutely not of this earth, curiosity warred with unease, a strange calm holding panic at bay. I stared, transfixed, as it watched us, its awareness as palpable as my own. The night held its breath, and so did we. After some time, I had almost convinced myself that I was imagining it due to my drowsy condition and the dim light. But then I noticed my wife's breathing shift, no longer deep and regular. Suddenly, I realized that my wife was no longer breathing like she was asleep. Her breathing had become almost silent. I spoke softly, testing the silence. Speaking in a calm voice, I said, "Honey, you awake?" She replied, "Yes." So I added, "Do you, see anything?" Her answer chilled me. She said, "You mean that thing standing at the foot of the bed?" The words hung between us, confirming the impossible. We didn't move, didn't dare. The figure remained, a sentinel of shadow, its gaze unyielding. When she said this, I did finally become somewhat nervous, and we both then began to pray. Our voices were low, the prayers a fragile shield against the unknown. We lay there for about 10 minutes, softly saying prayers, and then it was gone. It didn't vanish in a blink, but faded slowly, like smoke dissolving in the air. But it didn't just disappear. Over a period of about 20 seconds, it became less solid, like smoke clearing, and our perception of its presence became weaker and weaker until it just wasn't there anymore. The room felt lighter, the presence gone, but the memory burned bright. The house was ours again, but the questions lingered. Nothing like this has ever happened since. And the only evidence that it did happen at all are my memories of it. We talked about it the next morning. Our voices hushed, as if speaking too loudly might summon it back. My wife's eyes held the same mix of wonder and unease I felt. Her confirmation of the figure a tether to reality. We searched for explanations, tired eyes, tricks of light, a shared delusion, but none fit. The land was new, the house untouched by tragedy, yet something had found us. Other strangeness had marked our time there. Objects moved, faint sounds in empty rooms, but nothing like that night. I began to wonder about the land itself, its history beyond human homes. Had something older claimed that space? Something that didn't need walls to exist? We stayed in the house, but I never slept the same. My eyes always drifting to the doorway, waiting for that glide of shadow. The children returned, their laughter filling the silence, but I kept the bathroom light on, a ritual against the dark. Years passed, and the house stood quiet. But that night became a cornerstone of my memory, a moment where the world's edges frayed. I read about shadow people, entities caught between worlds, but the stories never quite matched our visitor. It hadn't threatened us, hadn't spoken, yet its presence was a language of its own, speaking of awareness, of intent. I wondered if it had been curious, like me, or if it had come for something we couldn't understand. My wife and I rarely spoke of it again, but when we did, our words were careful, as if the memory could reopen a door. The world is bigger than we know, and not all of it is kind. I've lived long enough to see the unexplainable, to feel the weight of things unseen. That night taught me that some entities don't need a reason to appear, they simply are, existing in the spaces we call home. I check the shadows now, wherever I go, knowing they might hold more than darkness. The silent watcher left no trace, but it changed me, reminding me that even in a new house, on empty land, we're never truly alone. Story number 14, The Trials of the Dream. Your dreams aren't yours tonight. They twist, pulling you into a world too vivid, too sharp, where the air hums with intent. You're not in control. Something watches, weaving threads of desire and dread into your mind. This isn't sleep. It's a battlefield, and your soul is the prize. The mistake was staying. I used to get sleep paralysis a lot. One night, I had a lucid dream. It started out that I was at work and I had super strength. The office buzzed with admiration, coworkers gazing at me like I was their savior. Everyone was admiring me like I was a real hero. I got hurt on the job and had to go see the boss. At first, I was talking to the boss and things seemed normal. General questions about the injury and stuff. Then it shifted. He asked me, "What do you think about the powers I've given you?" His face looked off somehow, just wrong. His eyes weren't human. They gleamed, too bright, too knowing. At this point, I realized I was dreaming, but I couldn't get out of it. It just kept going while he started offering me more power if I wanted it. The air grew heavy. I didn't know how to explain it, but I didn't feel like this was coming from my subconscious. It felt external and sinister. I knew I had to fight. Feeling like my soul was in jeopardy, I grabbed him and threw him through this door that appeared. It was a door to the void. The darkness swallowed him, and I felt a rush, like I'd won. I felt like I'd passed a test. But the dream didn't end. The secretary at our work came and stood in the doorway. She started praising me for turning down temptation for power, but she just kept getting more and more seductive. Her voice was honey, her eyes pulling me in. Just like before, I felt this was sinister. Her smile was a trap. Out of nowhere, I threw her at the door. The void took her, and I snapped awake, heart racing. In that moment, I snapped awake, breathing heavily and actually feeling proud of some sort of accomplishment. I felt like I passed 2 tests of temptation. The room was dark, my girlfriend asleep beside me. I was about to tell my girlfriend who was laying beside me. Then it hit. In that moment, I suddenly became paralyzed, just like sleep paralysis. Except I was awake when it hit me. My eyes were open and I was in the same world, but outside I could hear terrible things like screaming. As people were being attacked and killed, I could visualize basically our world. But everything about it was violent and terrifying. The walls pulsed. While paralyzed, I could feel something horrible flying towards my window to take me away. It wasn't just coming, it was here. The air thickened, a shadow growing outside the glass. I was actually crying so hard my girlfriend woke up and started shaking me to snap out of it. As soon as I got out of it, I held her crying and told her what happened. The dream wasn't over. It clung to me, a weight I couldn't shake. The whole experience made me feel like I'd been challenged with the temptation of power, then lust, and those who had failed. I'd forgotten about the last tool of the devil, so to speak, fear. I have never been a very religious person, and this was the first time I'd ever entertained the idea of being tempted by the devil or whatever. The thought unnerved me, a crack in my skepticism. Something had tested me. I started noticing things, shadows that lingered too long, whispers in the quiet of night. They weren't dreams. My girlfriend saw it too, a flicker in the window. Gone when we looked closer. It was still watching. I dug deeper. Books on lucid dreaming spoke of entities, forces that slip into the mind when it's open. They don't need names. They feed on choice. On the moment you falter, I'd said no. But it wasn't done. The paralysis came again. Not often, but enough. Each time, the screams were louder. I saw the void door in my dreams, not a victory, but a warning. It was still open. A friend into occult studies gave me a charm, a stone etched with symbols. It helped, but not enough. The air in our apartment changed, colder in corners, heavier at night. It was waiting. I can't close the door. The trials didn't end. One of the most terrifying experiences I've ever been through. I stopped sleeping deeply, afraid of slipping back into that world. It knows my name. I found scratches on the charm, faint but deliberate. It's patient. My girlfriend moved out, unable to handle the nights I woke crying, the shadows she swore she saw. I don't blame her. I keep the lights on, the charm close. It's not enough. The screams still echo in my head, not dreams but memories. They're real. Every night, I fight to stay awake. I don't talk about it, not because I'm scared, but because speaking it feels like inviting it back. It's already too close. If you dream too vividly, don't stay. Don't listen to the voices offering gifts. They're not yours to take. The void is real, and it's hungry. Don't open the door. Story number 15, The Stranger's Lens. The city lights glittered below, but the air up here felt wrong. I took some friends to this bar that sits on the top of the 30-story hotel. The rooftop was a sleek escape, all glass and neon, perched high above the streets. But the crowd was restless, the line snaking through a maze of ropes, and I felt eyes on us, sharp and hidden. My friends and I were chilling, most of us just on our phones trying to pass the time. We were a group of college kids, buzzing with the thrill of a night out, oblivious to the shadows around us. I was scrolling through X, laughing at a meme, when a prickle ran down my neck. Someone was watching. And it wasn't just the bouncer. He was there, across the lobby, a figure out of place. I look up from my phone to engage my surroundings when I see a man standing across the lift from us. He was short, stocky, his frame oddly compact, like a statue carved from stone. His phone up to his waist to seem low-key, and take a picture of us. The shutter sound cut through the hum of the crowd, unmistakable, and my eyes locked with his lens. The photo definitely caught me staring right at the camera. I froze, my phone forgotten, as the man lowered his device, his face hidden behind a mask glittering with rhinestones. The reason I know for a fact he took a picture is because his sound was still on. My heart kicked up, a warning I couldn't shake. We weren't alone in noticing him. I immediately looked to my girlfriend to see if she saw what I saw. But she was on her phone. She was lost in her screen, unaware of the stranger's gaze. I turned to my friend Oliver, and his eyes were blazing, fixed on the man. I then looked over to my other side to see my friend Oliver Death glaring the guy who took our picture. Oliver's jaw was tight, his fists clenched, and I knew he'd seen it too. Oliver then looked over at me, and I gave him a look, saying that I saw the same thing. We didn't speak, but our eyes did. Something was off, and we both felt it. We then texted in the group chat and went down, and everyone looked over at the guy. The group stirred, whispers rippling through our chat, but no one dared confront him. The man was a question mark, his motives a void. For visuals, this guy was probably in his mid to late 30s, around 5'8" and built like a thumb, short and stout. His mask sparkled under the lobby lights, its rhinestones forming a word I couldn't read. He had a mask, so I couldn't see his face, but the mask had rhinestones on it. It was gaudy, out of place, like he wanted to be noticed, but not known. I think we were all waiting for one of us to speak up and say something about it, but no one did. Our friend Jake, a linebacker built like a wall, later admitted he'd seen the photo snap, but stayed quiet to avoid trouble. One of the guys in our group, a 6'3", 250 football player, not someone to mess with, later said that he saw the guy take a photo. I wanted action, but silence won, and the man slipped away. His phone call pulling him into the crowd. The guy then got a call on his phone and walked away. He didn't vanish, though he followed us home. The bar was a blur of drinks and laughter, but I kept scanning the room, expecting his mask to glint in the corner. He never appeared, but the unease clung to me, a shadow I couldn't shake. Even when we were in the bar, I would occasionally look around to see if the guy made it up, but I never saw him after that. The next day, hungover and craving grease, we piled into Oliver's car for a McDonald's run. I made plans with my girlfriend and Oliver to hang out. The drive-thru was slow, the morning gray, and I was half asleep when Oliver's voice cut through. We were in the drive-thru when a car pulls up behind us. "It's him," he said. His eyes locked on the rearview mirror. Oliver looks in the rearview mirror and starts freaking. The past wasn't done with us. He says he didn't want to alarm anyone, but it was the man from yesterday. I twisted in my seat, and there he was, same stocky build, same rhinestone mask now dangling from his hand. I look back, and it's him. His car idled behind us, too close, his gaze probing our tinted windows. The man pulled his car from the drive-thru, parked, got out the car, and put on a mask with rhinestones on it. He walked toward the restaurant, pausing to peer into our car, his steps deliberate. As he was walking over, he clearly tried to look into the car at us. The tint saved us, blurring his view, but my pulse raced. Oliver had tinted windows. I wanted to believe it was a coincidence, but the odds were razor thin. I said, "Yeah, it probably could be, maybe not. Though, what are the odds that we see the same man we saw yesterday in the city in the middle of nowhere?" He kept finding us, or we kept finding him. A week later, I was driving Oliver to pick up a TV from a friend's house. His car a wreck of flat tires and missing parts. The night was cold, the street lights dim, and I parked across from the house, waiting. I offered to give him a ride because he's my best. Oliver vanished inside, his chatter bound to delay him, and I slouched in the driver's seat. Annoyed, I park on the street across from the house. Then I saw him, a short, stout figure leading a scrappy dog down the sidewalk. I saw the thumb-shaped man walking down the street with a little rat dog, no mask this time, but his shape was unmistakable. A silhouette burned into my memory. He then hops off the sidewalk and starts walking diagonally toward this car with his rat dog. My breath caught as he angled toward me, his dog yapping, the street empty. I start to get scared. He was too close, too real. I gripped the wheel, my eyes darting to the house, willing Oliver to hurry. Oliver comes out of the house and starts walking over. The man veered away, passing Oliver with a casual wave. The man switches his course and walks past Oliver and says something to him. Oliver laughed, but his eyes met mine through the window, wide with urgency. I see him laugh and wave and then look through the car window as if to say, "Let's get the hell out of here." I started the engine, my hands shaking, and we peeled out. I start the car, and as we're leaving, I ask Oliver what the man said. Oliver's voice was tight. He said hi, then turned back and said, "Nice weather we're having." Weird, right? Oliver said the man said hi to him at first when he first passed, but then a few seconds later, as Oliver was a good distance away, he turned around and said, "Nice weather we're having." The night was freezing. The words, "up," and we both knew it was him. The questions never stopped. We both discussed how odd that was and how the man strongly resembled the guy who took our picture in the city. We drove in silence, the man's shadow lingering in our minds. Nothing has happened since. But occasionally, I will get the feeling that someone is following me in stores, in parking lots. I'd catch a glimpse of someone too familiar, too quick to vanish. I still cannot deny that taking pictures of strangers, looking into people's cars when there are clearly people in there, and saying nice weather when it's 40 degrees out and late at night to a complete stranger are all quite bizarre. Was he a creep, a spy, or just a man with a strange hobby? I'm not sure what to make of it. The answers never came, but the unease stayed. A weight I carried home. I check my rearview mirror now, always waiting for that rhinestone mask to glint in the dark. Story number 16, The Watcher at the Crosswalk. In Brentwood, California, trust is as common as the morning fog. But some faces make you question everything. Where I live is a small town, Brentwood, California, not where O.J. Simpson had his puzzling trial. At 15, I'm woven into the fabric of this 50,000-strong community, where every trip to Safeway or Starbucks means familiar smiles. But one man, my old crossing guard from middle and high school, unraveled that comfort. He was always very weird, a specter from my past whose gaze now haunts the present. This isn't just a chance encounter. It's a reminder that danger can wear a familiar face. He was never just background noise. Back in middle school, his shouts echoed across the crosswalk, a daily ritual that felt more like a threat than a protection. Every morning and every evening, he was there yelling at kids to not cross. His oddities piled up, scratching his nether regions around the children, then appearing one day with his whole head and face shaved, a stark shift from his former Ron Swanson-like appearance. Now, years later, I saw him today at the Safeway Starbucks, and his eyes are locked onto me like a hunter sighting prey. This wasn't the cozy Brentwood I knew. This was a place where shadows lingered too long. Some stares cut deeper than words. I'm no stranger to attention. I'm 15 years old, 5 foot, curvy, and get a lot of looks. But his gaze was different, heavy, with intent. I ordered a regular coffee for my mother and a frappe for myself, trying to ignore the chill creeping up my spine. In the Starbucks glass wall, I caught his reflection, unblinking, fixed on me. He wasn't just watching. He was claiming me with his eyes, and it made my heart race with fear. This was no small-town quirk. This was something darker, something personal. Safety is an illusion when eyes follow you. Brentwood's charm lies in its predictability, but he shattered that. I got up quick to fill the coffee with some cream, and I could see him looking at my ass in the glass wall. His stare didn't falter, not even when I turned to confront it. He gets up and shouts while looking at me, demanding more ice at the counter, his voice a jolt that made me flinch. This wasn't a man lost in thought. This was a predator testing boundaries, and I was his target. The air in the store thickened. Every step a battle to stay calm. You can't hide in a town this small. I wanted to believe he was harmless, just a simple middle-aged man, but my instincts screamed otherwise. He's still waiting there, even though they said no. His presence a weight as I grabbed my drink. I fled to find Mom, but his eyes followed, unyielding. Brentwood's never felt so small, so suffocating, as it did under his gaze. This wasn't just a memory from middle school. It was a threat that had found me again, and I wasn't sure I could escape it. The Safeway was my refuge, a place where I could lose myself in the hum of shoppers and the clink of carts. Middle school was about 4 years ago, and back then the crossing guard was a daily oddity. Before he had all his hair, even a mustache, he cut a striking figure. But his behavior, scratching himself in plain sight, made my stomach turn. My mother and I looked over one day, uneasy but dismissing it as just another Brentwood quirk. People are people. We all have a special little thing about ourselves. I'd tell myself, trying to normalize the unease. He was gone by 8th grade year, and I breathed easier, thinking the town had shed its strangest shadow. But shadows don't vanish, they wait. I'm now a sophomore in junior high school, navigating Brentwood's familiar streets with a confidence born of knowing everyone. Yet seeing him at the Starbucks counter stopped me cold. While waiting for my drink, he stared me down, his eyes stripping away the safety of the crowded store. I tried to focus on the barista's chatter, but his presence was suffocating. He didn't take his eyes off me until I turned around to look, and even then his gaze lingered, bold and unashamed. I hurried to the cream station, my hands trembling, but his reflection in the glass followed me, a silent promise of something I couldn't name. The situation escalated. I jumped in my seat from fear when he shouted, his voice cutting through the store's hum. He goes to ask for more ice at the pickup area, and they politely declined. But he didn't leave. His insistence felt like a performance, a way to keep me in his orbit. I grabbed my frappe and straw, my pulse pounding, and rushed to find Mom in the grocery aisles. I walk away to tell my mom who's getting groceries, spilling the story in a rush. She remembers him all too well and wasn't surprised, her face tightening as she recalled his past. He's always been off, she said, but her voice carried a new edge, a warning I hadn't heard before. We moved through the store, but the normalcy of shopping felt hollow. Every aisle seemed to hold his shadow. Every glance over my shoulder, a check for his presence. We walk around still and soon leave after about an hour, and he's still there, rooted at the counter like a statue. As we loaded our bags, I could feel his eyes, a weight that made my skin prickle. As we pull out of the parking lot, there he is, staring at my mother and I, his focus unrelenting. My mother looks over after a few seconds and then looks away, whistling. Her attempt at calm betrayed by the tension in her hands. I sank into the car seat, willing the town to swallow him whole. Home should have been a sanctuary, but his gaze followed me, a specter I couldn't shake. This guy might just be a simple middle-aged man, I told myself, but the lie rang hollow. It takes a lot to get me creeped out, but he was able to do it. Brentwood's charm, its smallness, its familiarity, had turned against me, making every corner a potential hiding place. I locked the door behind us, the sound too loud in the quiet house. Mom unpacked groceries, her movements brisk, but I saw the worry in her eyes. Maybe he's just lonely, she offered, but the words felt like a shield against something we both feared. That night, I lay awake, the glow of my phone casting jagged shadows on the walls. I hope I never encounter him again. He really freaked me out. I kept replaying his face, weathered, unshaven, his eyes like voids that saw too much. What did he want? Why me? Brentwood's supposed to be safe, a place where the worst threat is a nosy neighbor. But he'd changed that, turning my home into a place of doubt. I avoided Safeway the next day, opting for a corner store, but the town felt smaller, its streets narrower. Every stranger's glance felt like his, every shadow a threat. Days later, I heard whispers at school. A girl saw a man lingering near the crosswalk, watching kids too closely. Was it him? I didn't know, but the thought tightened the knot in my chest. I'm not one to judge people, but he wasn't just quirky. He was dangerous, a predator hiding in plain sight. I wanted to tell someone, but what proof did I have? A stare? A feeling? Yet the fear was real, a weight I carried everywhere. Brentwood's never felt so fragile, and I'm not sure it'll ever feel safe again. Some watchers don't leave, they haunt. Story number 17, The Scribbled Shadow of Laguna. The air in the old house felt wrong tonight, like it was holding its breath. The walls of the Laguna Beach cottage, weathered by a century of secrets, seemed to lean inward, watching me. I stood alone in the bedroom, the silence so thick it pressed against my ears. My wife, Clara, had stormed out after our argument, something trivial, maybe about dishes or bills, I couldn't recall. She'd gone to the cafe down the block, leaving me in this creaking relic of the 1920s. I saw a shadow person once. I didn't know that's what it was called until much later, though. The house had a past, a speakeasy in the Prohibition days, a brothel in the Force, a hideout for smuggled souls crossing borders in the 70s. Its history clung to the air like damp rot. Something moved in the dark, and my heart stuttered. The house's layout was a maze cobbled together by reckless builders. My bedroom faced a hallway that stretched past the bathroom, its far end swallowed by shadows. From my bedroom, I could look across the hall into the bathroom, then through the bathroom and down the other hall. I was rifling through my dresser, searching for a lighter, when a flicker caught my eye, not light, but the absence of it. I was standing at my dresser, and I just noticed movement from the corner of my eye. I turned, expecting Clara or a stray cat from the open window. Instead, I saw nothing, but the nothing moved. It wasn't human, but it was alive. Down the hall, where the bathroom's dim glow met the dark, a shape pulsed. It was maybe 3 feet tall, and it was only vaguely humanoid. It looked like black scribbles, like someone had scribbled a human shape, but the scribbles moved like electricity arcing. My breath hitched. The figure wasn't solid. It quivered. a sketch torn from a mad artist's notebook, its edges sparking like frayed wires. I should have been terrified, but I wasn't, not yet. I distinctly remember when I saw it. I wasn't afraid, simply confused. I squinted, trying to make sense of it, wondering if the house's old wiring was playing tricks on my eyes. Then it saw me, and the world tilted. The scribbled shadow didn't turn, it shifted, its form snapping into focus like a predator locking onto prey. Then it noticed me, looking at it. I can't say it turned around. It just focused on me. My stomach dropped. The air grew heavy, charged with something ancient and wrong. And then I was scared. I didn't move. I didn't scream, nothing. I was just frozen. My legs refused to budge. My voice caught in my throat. The shadow surged forward, not running but gliding, its scribbled form stretching and twisting down the hall. It rushed down the hall towards me. I braced for impact, my mind blank with panic. The house fought back before I could. As the shadow crossed the bathroom's threshold, the door nearest me slammed shut with a force that rattled the walls. As soon as it entered the bathroom, the door closest to me just slammed shut of its own accord. The sound shattered my paralysis. Then I screamed. I stumbled back, heart hammering, and bolted for the front door. I yelled for my wife, but she wasn't home. Sunlight hit me like a lifeline as I staggered onto the porch, gulping air. I went outside into the daylight and did not return until she came back about 10 minutes later. I didn't go back inside until Clara returned, her coffee cup still steaming, her face puzzled as I babbled about what I'd seen. The days that followed were restless. Clara laughed it off, blaming stress or bad lighting, but I couldn't shake the image of that scribbled thing. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe I saw something supernatural, but I do know I saw something. I started digging into the house's past, chasing answers. The old-timers at the local bar spoke in hushed tones about the cottage. They said it wasn't just a speakeasy or a brothel, it was a place where deals were made, not with money, but with promises. Promises to the things that weren't human. A fisherman claimed his grandfather, a smuggler, had seen shapes in that house, things that moved like ink spilled in water. I listened, skeptical but rattled. One night, I found an old journal tucked behind a loose floorboard in the bedroom. Its pages were brittle, the ink faded, but the words chilled me. A woman, maybe a tenant from the 40s, wrote of the scribbler that came when the house was angry. She described it just as I had, small, humanoid, a mess of moving lines. She'd seen it after a fight with her lover, when the house's air turned sour. Her final entry was incomplete, ending mid-sentence. It knows I see it, and now it... The rest was a torn page. I burned the journal in the backyard, telling myself it was just a story. But the house didn't let me forget. At night, when Clara slept, I'd hear faint scratches, like charcoal on paper. Coming from the hallway, I'd check, flashlight in hand, but find nothing. Only the bathroom door slightly ajar, though I'd sworn I'd closed it. I started sleeping with the lights on, telling Clara it was for reading. She didn't buy it. We fought more, the tension feeding something in the walls. One evening, alone again, I caught a glimpse of it in the bathroom mirror, not the shadow, but its trace, a smudge of black that vanished when I blinked. I packed a bag that night. I began researching the land itself, beyond the house. The library's archives mentioned a forgotten ritual site, a cliffside nearby where locals once left offerings to keep the dark at bay. The cottage, it turned out, was built atop that same cliff. Historians dismissed it as folklore, but I couldn't. The scribbler wasn't a ghost. It was a remnant, a fragment of something the land remembered. I spoke to a retired priest who'd lived in Laguna decades ago. He wouldn't enter the house, but blessed the porch, muttering about things that draw on discord. He said anger, mine, Clara's, the house's, fed it. The final straw came on a stormy night. Clara was away, visiting her sister. I was alone, reading in the living room when the power cut out. The silence was deafening, broken only by that scratching sound, louder now. From the hallway, I grabbed a flashlight, my hand shaking, and crept toward the bathroom. The door was wide open. In the mirror, I saw it, not a smudge, but the scribbler itself, its electric lines pulsing behind me. I didn't wait. I ran, drove to a motel, and never spent another night in that house. We moved out a week later, citing structural issues to the landlord. I never told Clara the full truth. She wouldn't have believed me. But I know what I saw, and it wasn't a trick of the light. The scribbled shadow wasn't a ghost or a demon. It was something older, tied to the house's bones, its history of broken promises and spilled blood. I simply don't know what it is. Sometimes, driving past Laguna Beach, I wonder if it's still there, waiting for the next tenant to argue, to stir the house's wrath, to see what shouldn't be seen. I wonder if the land itself is watching, its dark memory etched in scribbled lines, hungry for the next promise to break. Story number 18, The Vision of Catastrophe. The air in the karaoke bar was thick with laughter and the sour tang of cheap beer, but then a whisper cut through the noise. A plane had crashed in New York. The room barely stirred. Drunk voices dismissed it as some minor accident. I froze, my vision blurred, and suddenly I wasn't in Australia anymore. I was high above a city, strapped into a seat, the hum of engines deafening. Through the window, a steel giant loomed closer, a skyscraper, gleaming under a cruel blue sky. My heart pounded as screams filled the cabin. This wasn't an accident. This was intent. I could feel the malice in the air, heavy as smoke. My eyes snapped open, back in the bar. The music felt distant, like a memory. My hands shook as I grabbed my coworker's arm. The words tore out of me, raw and unfiltered. Thousands of people are dead. This was deliberate. It'll change the world forever. I didn't know how I knew. I just did. The room spun. Faces blurred into shadows. My knees buckled, and the world went black. When I came to, I was sprawled on a couch in my coworker's apartment. Her face hovered above me, pale as ash. "You were right," she whispered. "Thousands of people are dead. It was a terrorist attack." "How did you know?" Her voice cracked, fear replacing the warmth we'd once shared. That night, the dreams came. Planes exploding in a bright blue sky, fire blooming like flowers against the horizon. They weren't just dreams. They were visions, sharp and relentless, carving themselves into my mind. I woke up gasping, the weight of what I'd seen pressing against my chest. The bar's neon glow faded into memory as days turned to weeks. My coworker avoided me, her eyes darting away whenever we passed in the office. That was the end of the friendship that I had been building between us. I couldn't blame her. I'd scared myself too. The vision in the bar wasn't the first time I'd seen things others couldn't. As a child, I'd dreamed of a bridge collapsing, cars plunging into a river. 2 days later, it was on the news. Another time, I saw my aunt's face, pale and still, hours before we got the call about her accident. I've had quite a few dreams that predicted the future or gave me information about something happening in the recent past or present before others knew. But this was different. The scale of it, the horror, felt like a wound in the fabric of reality. I tried to move on, to drown the unease in routine, but the city felt different now. Sydney's bright streets seemed to hum with a quiet dread, as if the world itself was holding its breath. At night, I'd sit on my balcony, staring at the stars, wondering why these visions chose me. I don't believe in God, but it's really hard for me to deny the supernatural. Was it a gift, a curse, or just my mind breaking under some cosmic weight I couldn't name? Months passed, and I started noticing patterns. The visions weren't random. They came when I was unguarded, when my mind was loose, like in the haze of alcohol or the edge of sleep. I began keeping a journal, scribbling down every detail I could remember. The planes, the fire, the screams, they were gone now. Those dreams stopped after that, but others took their place. A ship sinking in a storm, faces trapped behind glass, a forest fire swallowing a town. Each one left me hollow, afraid to sleep, afraid of what I'd see next. One night, I met a stranger at a cafe, an older woman with eyes that seemed to see through me. I don't know why I told her about the visions. Maybe I was desperate for answers. She listened quietly, then leaned forward. "You're not alone," she said. "There are others who see, but you have to be careful. The more you see, the more it takes." Her words chilled me. What did it take? My sanity, my life. I left the cafe shaken, her warning looping in my mind. Years later, I stood at the edge of a cliff, the ocean roaring below. The visions hadn't stopped, but I'd learned to live with them. They were part of me, like the scars on my hands or the ache in my chest. I thought of that night in the bar, the moment the world changed. Perhaps one day science might be able to confirm and explain this sort of thing. Until then, I'd carry the weight of knowing too much, too soon, and never enough to change what was coming. Story number 19, Eyes in the Shadows. I was around 15, fairly skinny, looking about 45 kilos, though my actual weight was 58. Years of sprinting and soccer had carved me lean, but my short stature made me seem younger, a kid lost in a teenager's world. I played a lot of sports, and it all started while my team was training at a place on the outer region of the city. The industrial district was a maze of gray warehouses and flickering streetlights, far from the cozy hum of downtown. After practice, I'd walk home alone, the sky bleeding orange as the sun dipped low. On one such evening, I saw a group of grown men standing across the street. Their faces were half lit, cigarette smoke curling around them like ghosts. One of them pulled out his phone and pointed it at me. I shrugged it off. The sun was setting, so I thought he was capturing the horizon. But as I kept walking, I noticed he was following me with his camera. The lens tracked my every step, a predator's gaze. My stomach twisted. I started walking faster. The street wasn't empty. Cyclists, dog walkers, a mom pushing a stroller, but their presence didn't ease the chill creeping up my spine. Who was this guy? Why me? I tugged my hoodie tighter, eyes darting to the shadows. The phone stayed on me, unblinking like an eye that never closed. My dad's auto shop was a few blocks away, a beacon of safety. I usually went there to drop my gear so he could drive it home. But that day, I decided to stay until he closed. The men lingered across the street, their silhouettes unmoving. I felt their stares long after I slipped inside. The shop smelled of oil and rubber, grounding me. I told Dad I'd wait, blaming exhaustion. He didn't question it, just nodded and handed me a soda. From then on, I wore a bulky jacket to avoid notice, unsure what else to do. But the incidents didn't stop. In winter, we trained at an indoor sports center. The place buzzed with life. Kids laughing, parents chatting, a Christmas market spilling light and noise into the snow-dusted lot. I felt safe, untouchable. But as I walked past the market, I saw someone filming me. Not the same man, a new face, younger, with a beanie pulled low. I pulled my scarf up to my nose, heart racing. His phone followed me, steady, deliberate. I wove through the crowd, pulse hammering. Was this a coincidence or something worse? I started taking different routes home, zigzagging through alleys and back streets. Sometimes I'd beg a teammate for a ride, claiming I'd missed the bus. The incidents repeated. A man in a parka at the park, his camera panning as I jogged by. A figure in a coffee shop window, phone angled just so. Each time, the same cold dread, like I was prey in a game I didn't understand. I stopped listening to music on my walks, ears straining for footsteps. At night, I'd lie awake, replaying those moments. What did they want? Were they watching me now? The city, once familiar, felt like a trap. In spring, I was grocery shopping. The store was bright, crowded, normal. An old man stood near the register, maybe 60, unremarkable. I assumed he was waiting for someone. But as I paid, I felt something brush my face. His head was inches from mine. His breath sour, eyes locked on me. I grabbed my items and cash, rushing out. Horrified, my skin crawled as I sprinted home, groceries banging against my legs. He hadn't filmed me, but his closeness felt like a violation, a message. Now, I scan every face, every hand holding a phone. I'm watching my surroundings more, hoping they'll stop. But the fear lingers, a shadow that follows me. Just last week, I saw a car idling across from the shop, its driver staring. When I stepped outside, it sped off. I've started carrying a whistle, a habit from my mom's old safety lectures. The city's edges feel sharper now, its corners darker. I don't know who they are, but I know they're still out there, waiting. Story number 20, The Creep at the Coffee Shop. The mall was a labyrinth of noise and light, but something felt off that night. The air was thick with the hum of chatter, the clinking of coins, and the faint scent of pretzels from the food court. A group of teens wandered through the crowd, their laughter echoing off the polished tiles. Among them was Jake, a 5-year-old with a stocky build and a quick temper, and his new friend, Mia, a quiet 13-year-old with sharp eyes. The night was supposed to be fun, a carefree escape from school and rules, but as the clock ticked closer to 10 p.m., the group started to thin out, leaving Jake and Mia alone in the buzzing chaos. The Starbucks at the end of the mall glowed like a beacon, promising warmth and a quick caffeine fix. This happened a year ago when we were on a mall having a good time. But there was about 7 of us. 6 of us were 14 and one of them 13. The others had left, their parents' cars pulling up one by one to whisk them away. Jake glanced at Mia, who was fidgeting with her phone. "Wanna grab a coffee?" he asked. She nodded, and they headed toward the coffee shop. Its windows fogged it with condensation. The place was packed, a mix of tired shoppers and late-night stragglers. It was getting late and almost 10 o'clock, and because of this, we decided to go grab a coffee. Outset, the night air was cool, but a strange tension hung over the empty tables. I said to her to just stay outside, and there were some tables where we could sit. Jake told Mia to wait while he joined the sluggish line inside. The baristas were frazzled, juggling orders as the clock ticked toward closing time. The line was slow and the coffees were ready in 15 minutes. They were understaffed because the place was about to close. Mia sat at a table, her silhouette small against the neon glow. Jake kept an eye on her through the glass, but the crowd inside made it hard to focus. Then he saw it, a shadow looming too close to Mia, a figure that didn't belong. I go outside and see a grown man who seemed overweight in the same table, almost touching my friend. The man was in his 40s, his bulk spilling over the chair. As he leaned toward Mia, his voice low and chirpy. She shrank back, her discomfort obvious even from a distance. She was quite uncomfortable with the situation. Jake's heart pounded as he pushed through the door, the coffee cups burning his hands. The man's eyes flicked up, sizing him up with a smirk. This wasn't just a random encounter, it was a predator stalking his prey. Jake's legs felt heavy, but he forced himself to walk over. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice sharper than he intended. The man chuckled, a sound that crawled under Jake's skin. "I'm her boyfriend." Jake lied, stepping between Mia and the stranger. The guy then laughed in a way that made my blood boil. "How can you be interested in something like him? He's a kid. You need an adult." The man sneered, his words dripping with condescension. Mia's face flushed with anger, and she stood, her voice trembling but firm. She stood up and backed away from him and told him to leave her alone. The man didn't move. His eyes glinted with something dark, a hunger that made Jake's stomach churn. I couldn't comprehend why this guy was coming after her. She was so visibly underage. Jake's hands clenched into fists, his weight shifting to his stronger legs. He wasn't tall, but he was solid, and the rage bubbling inside him felt like it could topple a giant. The man leaned closer to Mia, ignoring Jake entirely, his hand grazing the edge of her chair. The air grew thick, the mall's noise fading into a dull roar in Jake's ears. Then a flicker of movement broke the tension. A barista came out of Starbucks and just stared at us. The young woman's gaze was steady, her presence a silent warning. The man hesitated, his smirk faltering. Jake seized the moment, his instincts overriding his fear. I felt confident in that moment to give him a really stern kick to the balls as he was distracted. The man doubled over, a choked gasp escaping his lips. Mia grabbed Jake's arm, and they bolted, their footsteps pounding against the pavement as they raced to the parking lot. And then we legged it to the parking lot to wait for our parents there instead. The parking lot was a maze of headlights and shadows, but it felt safer than the coffee shop's glow. Jake's chest heaved as he scanned the area, half expecting the man to follow. Mia was shaking, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. "You okay?" Jake asked, his voice softer now. She nodded, but her eyes were wide, haunted by the encounter. We became closer friends after that. The incident forged a bond between them, a shared defiance against the world's ugliness. But the memory of the man's laughter lingered, a reminder of how close danger had come. Weeks later, Jake couldn't shake the image of the man's face. "She's been through some stuff, but it still annoys me that these older creeps really think that they're going to get lucky with a 13-year-old girl." He started noticing things he hadn't before, the way some adults watched kids in the mall, their gazes lingering too long. Mia told him about other moments, smaller incidents that had left her uneasy. The Starbucks encounter wasn't isolated, it was part of a pattern, a world where predators hid in plain sight, blending into the crowd. One evening, Jake and Mia returned to the mall, determined not to let fear win. The Starbucks was quieter now, the tables empty under the fluorescent lights. They sat together, sipping their drinks. But Jake's eyes never stopped scanning the room. The barista from that night was there, and she gave them a small nod, as if she understood. The world felt a little less safe, but Jake knew he'd do whatever it took to protect his friend. I mean, how perverse can you be? Story number 21, The Shadows in the Dark. You're slumped on your couch, exhausted from endless work, the room dim and heavy. A shadow glides past, silent, a fleeting shape you dismiss as fatigue. I felt a shadow person once. Then another moves, closer, its form sharper, and you realize you're not alone. I had been up for about 4 days. They multiply, a crowd of silhouettes passing like strangers leaving a show, ignoring you, until one doesn't. And on the 4th night, I decide to try and get some sleep. A girl in a dress approaches, her arms outstretched, her presence chillingly real. I ended up being awake through all of it and started to see dark silhouettes walk by me, only a few feet away while I was on the couch. You swing at her, feeling her arm, but she vanishes, leaving you trembling in the dark. Eventually, this progressed into crowds of them walking by, as if people were just getting out of a movie theater or concert. The shadows are here, and they see you. Soon after, I looked across the room and saw 2 figures that looked like a guy in a lab coat and a girl in a dress. Silhouettes from afar talking to each other. You're drained. Days of relentless work stealing your sleep, leaving you wired on the couch. The apartment is quiet, the lights low, casting long shadows that seem to shift. At first, it's just one, a tall, formless figure gliding through the living room, gone before you can blink. You rub your eyes, blaming exhaustion, but they keep coming. Silhouettes passing a few feet away, silent and purposeful. They move like a crowd leaving a concert, ignoring you. But the air grows thick, charged with their presence. Across the room, 2 stand out, a man in a lab coat, a girl in a dress, talking, their shapes clear, almost solid. You stare, your mind foggy, trying to make sense of them. The room feels smaller, the shadows closer, and you're no longer sure what's real. She's coming, and she's not a dream. And I made the mistake of staring too long. Your gaze lingers too long, and the girl notices, her head turning toward you. They seemed to notice me looking, and the girl figure proceeded to walk toward me. And when she got close, She put her arms out. She moves, slow at first, then faster, her dress swaying, her arms reaching out as if to pull you in. You freeze, heart pounding, the room shrinking round her. I freaked out and went to slap her away when she got too close, but then I did feel my hands make contact with her arm. Your hand swings, connecting with her arm, cold, solid, real. But she's gone. When you grabbed your phone's flashlight, I then turned, shined the flashlight from my phone on her, and she was completely gone. The beam cuts through empty air. The others vanish too, leaving only silence and your shaking hands. You sit breathless, the touch lingering, a violation of reality that chills you. This was by far one of the scariest things I've ever experienced, and I still get chills just thinking about it. They're gone, but they're not forgotten. You don't sleep that night or the next. The apartment's quiet, now oppressive. You tell a friend, expecting skepticism, but they've heard of shadow people, figures born of exhaustion or something older, drawn to the weary. You search online, finding forums. Others saw crowds, felt touches. In dim rooms at their breaking point, a local historian mentions your building, old and restless, but no names stick. You post your story, connecting with those who felt the same cold grip. You move to a brighter place, work less, but check corners, avoid dark rooms. You dream of her, the girl, her arms outstretched, her touch too real. You join a group for those who've seen, their stories mirroring yours. Silhouettes, crowds, a hand in the dark. You write a blog, warning of shadows that linger, your words a shield. The apartment is behind you, but her arm, her presence, stays. A shiver you can't shake, waiting for the next sleepless night. Story number 22, The Red-Eyed Watcher. The bedroom was my sanctuary until the night it turned into a cage. I woke, frozen, my body betraying me as sleep paralysis gripped tight. A scaly black demon with red eyes perched in my closet, its gaze burning into my soul. It moved, slow and deliberate, toward my sleeping husband, a predator in our private space. This is the story of the creature that watched me, and the fear it left behind. The darkness was alive. The open closet, a portal to something unholy. I'd felt paralysis before, but never like this. Helpless, my heart a drumbeat in the silence. Red eyes glowed from the shadows. Unblinking, knowing I couldn't scream. The air grew thick. The room no longer mine. Something ancient had slipped through, and I was its captive. Bound by fear, I woke up bright-eyed in the middle of the night. I lay on my side, facing my husband and our open closet. I was on my side, facing my husband and the closet on the other side. The curtain was drawn aside, clothes hanging still. We had taken down the closet doors when we moved in since we hated bifold doors and just hung a curtain, but I saw it instantly. There was this scaly black demon with red eyes perched on my hang bar. It clung to the bar, a nightmare made flesh, while holding with one arm the top bar where his head reached between two jackets. It stared, mouth agape, creeping downward. He just sat there staring at me with his mouth open and very slowly started moving and creeping down towards the closet. My pulse roared, my body locked as it inched toward my husband, like he was moving towards my husband. I was trapped, watching. I couldn't do anything except watch with my eyes pounding to my ear. I blinked, and the void swallowed it. I must have snapped out of it at some point because I blinked and it was gone. I moved, trembling, to the closet. I finally could move and got the courage to get up and move over to the closet. Nothing was there. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. I left the curtain open, afraid to hide what might return. I didn't want to close the curtains. The red eyes linger in my dreams, a warning I can't shake. It damn freaked me out for a good few nights after that. Story number 23, The Ghost of Tank. The night was heavy, the kind that presses against your skin. I sat on the porch, the street dark and silent, when headlights flared. A red Ford Crown Victoria, its engine low, stopping just beyond my house. My heart skipped, my eyes locked on the driver, a man too familiar, too impossible. It was Tank, my stepfather, dead for years, but there, pointing at me, his shadow alive in the glow. I froze, my breath shallow, the air cold despite the summer heat. He shouldn't be here, couldn't be, but his outline was unmistakable, tall, broad, leaning on a cane, his gesture sharp, secret, meant only for me. The car idled, its tinted windows hiding his face, but I felt his gaze, a weight that knew my name, my fear, my doubt. The engine revved, the car pulling away, leaving me in the dark. I stood, my hands shaking, my mind racing. Tank was gone, his death recorded, his grave marked, but I'd seen him before, on streets, in dreams, in shadows. He wasn't dead, not to me. And now he was back, haunting my nights, my home. I checked the locks, my phone tight in my hand, the silence too loud. The house felt different, its walls watching, its corners hiding something I couldn't name. Was it him, faking his death, stalking me? Or was it something else, a ghost, a memory, a piece of him that wouldn't rest? I didn't know, but I wasn't alone. This wasn't grief, wasn't madness. It was real, a presence that followed me, that pointed, that drove away but never left. Tank, or whatever he was here, and I was trapped in his game, a game of secrets and shadows with no answers, only fear. My stepfather, Tank, passed away. Everyone I know believes he actually did pass away. I never did believe it, although there are records of his death. Now, I say this because I've had some odd encounters with someone that looks, sounds, and walks with a cane like he does. He stood at 6'1" and weighed roughly 260 pounds. He was a Hispanic Latino with a dark olive complexion and somewhat unruly facial hair. The small town in northwest Pennsylvania was quiet, its streets familiar, but after Tank's death, they changed. He apparently passed away during an examination for an amputation he had about 6 months prior. This is all in a small town in northwest Pennsylvania, but I never bought it, not fully. Not when he kept appearing, a shadow that wouldn't fade. It was from May when the following events started to happen. At first, it was just a dream that I had where I saw him after he faked his death. This happened about 4 or 5 times in vivid detail. His voice was clear, his laugh warm, his cane tapping in the ground. I woke each time, my heart racing, my room too dark. About this time, I started to see a 2005 candy apple red Ford Crown Victoria with slightly tinted windows stopping in front of my house at random hours of the day. These are the exact same details his car had that he was driving around in. But when it would stop, I would see someone that would resemble him exactly in the driver's seat. I would look at them, and they would turn their head to me and point in a style that I knew he did, that only me, my mother, and his cousin that lived in California knew. Thumb tucked in the closing fist on the left hand, index finger straight out, and pinky finger softly resting on his ring finger. He would only do this to me, his cousin, and my mother. It was a signal, a call for secrets, for talks no one else could hear. The gesture was his, unmistakable, a code from a man I'd loved, feared, known. But he was dead, or supposed to be, and now he was here, pointing, driving away before I could reach him, leaving me with questions, with dread, with a house that wasn't mine anymore. However, when this happened, I would walk to the car, but then Tank or the person in question would drive off, almost as if in a panic before I got close. This kept happening for about 5 months, when it just mysteriously stopped completely, and things became tame for a while. I thought it was all in my head, as if I was just missing him, or perhaps something mental. The quiet? Story number 24, The Stranger's Grip. I decided to make an impromptu journey to Poland in search of relatives I'd never met, but had only heard of via my ancestry research and an American cousin who reached out. The call of my roots was a siren song, pulling me across the ocean. I was a wanderer, chasing the threads of my past, unaware of the shadows waiting. As a lover of travel and languages, I was eager to go alone and see how I'd do. Adventure was my fuel, solitude my companion, but courage can be a fragile thing. I learned some Polish in college and have been traveling worldwide since I was 20, and the world was my map, each city a story. But Poland was personal. I stepped into Krakow, my heart open, my guard down, not knowing I'd meet a stranger who'd rewrite my journey. The city was a promise, but promises can hide traps. Krakow was a vibrant maze. I made the most of the trip by first exploring Krakow, an amazing city with buses and trains being the prominent mode of intercity transport. Its streets pulsed with history, its spires piercing a sky that felt both foreign and familiar. The city was alive, its energy a contrast to the quiet I sought. I lugged my suitcase the 40 minutes to the vast station to buy me a bus ticket to the next stop, ancestral homeland. The station was a beast, sprawling and chaotic, a hub of travelers and dreams. My suitcase was a burden, my steps unsure. But determination drove me forward. Now, being a country girl growing up, I'm still learning how to be adept at public transport and maneuvering people in streets. The crowds were a challenge, their rhythm alien to my rural heart. I was out of my element, a fish in a sea of strangers, but I pressed on. The McCafe was a false haven. I'm also shy and not great at social skills, but normally that doesn't stop me. My shyness was a shadow, but I'd learned to push through. The main bus/train station at Krakow is also a large, fancy mall, and I was delighted to find my cafe with free Wi-Fi. The cafe was a beacon, its familiarity a comfort in the storm of the station. My phone service does not extend to Europe, so that's all the contact I had. The Wi-Fi was my lifeline, connecting me to the world I'd left behind. I settled in and messaged a friend back home to my whereabouts. My phone glowed, a fragile tether to safety. The McCafe had the aura of a Starbucks bit, but the cheap prices of McDonald's, another plus. It was warm, inviting, a place to breathe. It was relatively busy and open to the public view, where I was sitting at a one-person booth next to an outlet to charge my phone before the long journey. The booth was my sanctuary, the outlet my anchor. But peace was fleeting. He shattered my calm after a short time. An older, gruff-looking gentleman with a thick, tattered winter coat sauntered in and immediately headed my way. His presence was a storm cloud, heavy and unwelcome. He seemed to be in some kind of construction work, as his coat was very warmly padded and dirty with the characteristic reflective yellow and orange colors. The coat was out of place, a worker's garb in a traveler's world. It did strike me as a bit strange, since the Station Mall was more travelers and shoppers than blue-collar workers. His difference was a warning, a crack in the cafe's warmth. He moved with purpose, his eyes locked on me, a predator sighting prey. The cafe was no longer safe. It was his stage, and I was his audience. I didn't know it then, but his grip would haunt me. His approach was a violation. As for him heading my way, I figured with the laptop he held out ahead of him that he was just looking for a plug as I had been. His laptop was a prop, an excuse to close the distance. Of course, mine was not the only outlet amid the moderately spacious cafe, but he chose to sit directly next to me, almost touching shoulders, and plugged into the second of two plugs I was using. His closeness was a trespass, his shoulder brushing mine. Sometimes, people don't have a sense of personal space, but this was no accident. His choice was deliberate. I guess this outlet was the closest to the entrance. The excuse was weak, his intent clear. I gripped my phone, my heart quickening as the cafe's warmth turned cold. He was here, and he wasn't leaving. His words were a lure. I shook it off, and he proceeded to speak to me in Kitcher at his laptop. His gestures were urgent, his hands too close. I got the sense that he needed some sort of technical assistance from me, a youth, and figured that would explain why he sat next to me. I wanted to believe he was harmless, a stranger needing help. I helped him set up the laptop on his Wi-Fi in broken Polish, and he thanked me by kissing my hand emphatically and smiling like he'd won the lottery. His kiss was a shock, his smile a mask. I noticed an icon at the bottom of his screen showing he had a Ukrainian keyboard equipped, and it was confirmed with what I heard earlier of his accent. His accent was a clue, but not a comfort. He kept looking my way, even though he no longer needed assistance, and I pretended to be busy on my phone, even though my friend on the other end wasn't necessarily responding quickly. My phone was a shield, but it was failing. His gaze was relentless, a weight I couldn't escape. He crossed boundaries. I didn't really want him to talk to me, but silence wasn't his intent. He kept his laptop slightly turned my way intentionally, as if he wanted me to see what he was doing. The screen was a trap, drawing my eyes. He opened up the Facebook and started a FaceTime call with a woman around his age or perhaps a little younger, and pointed the camera towards me to show her, and said something I couldn't understand that well. The camera's lens was a violation, my face stolen. I assumed he was telling her how I'd helped him out, but their conversation seemed strained, and she made a forced smile at me briefly, before they began talking loudly at each other again. Her smile was a mirror, tense and false. I tried to mind my own business, but it was awkward being in view of his FaceTime call and it being so loud that others in the cafe looked over at him. The cafe's hum turned hostile, eyes turning to us. The call ended soon thereafter, and I thought he would leave, but instead, he closed his laptop and proceeded to question me. His questions were a net closing around me. His friendliness was a lie. I tried my best to answer in broken Polish mixed with English, and he seemed to understand well enough. My words were halting, my voice a plea for distance. He was amicable, although dramatic, and every time I finally understood something he said and answered him satisfactorily, he would laugh and kiss my hand and not relinquish it. His laughter was a chain, his grip a cage. My cousin had warned me that the rural, old-fashioned men may kiss a lady's hand in greeting. The custom was quaint, but his touch was anything but. With this in the back of my mind, I wasn't sure if he was in the realm of cultural normality for the region or if it was too much. Doubt gnawed at me. My instincts dreaming, being the socially awkward person that I am, I decided to let it go, especially considering I'd been traveling alone for weeks at that point. Loneliness made me weak, but not blind. I suppose some human-to-human interaction would not be totally unwelcome, but I was wrong. His warmth was a facade. His questions turned predatory. His questions, despite the friendly smile that he most them with, were increasingly invasive since he seemed again to not be one for respecting personal space. Each question was a step closer, a boundary erased. I chalked it up to him being too friendly, but innocent enough. My hope was a lie, my trust a mistake. He asked why I was here and where I was from and going to, what my phone number was, and if I needed something later in my travels that he could return the favor I gave to him. His offer was a lure, his kindness a trap. That one sent me off. Even if he's ignorant to social norms in space. The question was a red flag, waving in my face. That one was odd, even for an old-fashioned man. It wasn't gratitude, it was intent. I didn't mind obliging him, though, because my number would be useless in Europe anymore, and gave him an alias instead of the real name. The alias was my shield, a small defiance. But he wasn't done. His hunger growing. He wouldn't let me go. During this conversation, he kept saying I didn't need to leave for the bus yet. His words were a chain, binding me to the booth, and it morphed later into, I needn't go on the bus at all. I could stay a while with his family. The invitation was a prison. His family a mystery I didn't want to meet. He insisted that he would repay me for my help. All I'd done was click a button, but he acted as if I'd saved his life. All I did was click the cafe free Wi-Fi and accept the terms. It was nothing, but to him, it was everything. It didn't seem like too much to warrant this much gratitude. But who knows with boomers? His gratitude was a mask, his insistence a threat. I mean, he managed to use FaceTime just fine. He wasn't helpless. He was hunting. My thoughts were fluttering around in my head. And I kept declining and said my family would be waiting for me. The lie was my escape. A fragile thread, a lie. We'd never met, and they didn't even know of my existence yet. But it was all I had. He tightened his grip. He said for me to just tell them I'd come later and to stay with him and his family instead. His insistence was a rope, pulling me closer. He also insisted on buying me a coffee, even though I hadn't finished the one I bought myself, and caused a fuss when I kept saying no. His fuss was a performance, drawing eyes. Mind you, this whole time he was still leaning towards me and holding onto my hand tightly. His grip was iron, my hand a prisoner. I was getting sweaty. Panic was a tide rising in my chest because of it. It was hard for me to try and collect my things and leave, or even shoot a message to my friend. My phone was useless, my freedom slipping. What do I do? The question was a scream, unanswered. He called to the cashier at the counter about 10 feet away and asked for him to bring me a coffee. His voice was loud, demanding, a kinksy issuing orders. The cashier replied that the man may walk up to the register and place his order, but he refused twice. His refusal was a power play, a show of control. His friendly demeanor when speaking to me was gone as he nearly yelled at the cashier to meet his demands and threw the cash onto the table for him. His anger was a crack in the mask, revealing the truth. He stole my space. The man turned back to me and was smiley again and insisted I stayed to drink the coffee with him and chat. His smile was a lie, his eyes predatory. He knew where my bus was leaving and where it was going. He'd seen my ticket, his gaze a thief. He knew because he looked over my shoulder at my ticket when it was resting on the table next to my phone. My carelessness was his gain, my ticket, his map. I headed out to memorize the pickup location in time, and again, my hand held hostage in his. I didn't have a chance to move the ticket out of sight. His grip was a chain, my hand trapped. He was blatantly stalling me and still insisting on me going to see him and his family. His words were a cage, his intent clear. I was no longer a traveler, I was prey, caught in his web. The cafe was a trap, its warmth a lie. I fought to escape. I finally got upset not wanting to miss the bus and waste my money on that ticket. Anger was my strength, my last defense. Plus, I had a ride waiting for me, expecting my arrival at that particular time. The lie was a lifeline, a reason to flee. In my limited Polish, I told him just so. My voice was firm, my words a blade. The people-pleaser in me was torn, but ultimately the hostess, who would be awaiting me, had won out over the man glued to my side. Duty was my shield, my escape. Somehow, he finally let up and nodded sadly when I said I must leave now. His nod was reluctant, his eyes hungry. I gulped the burning hot coffee he bought just for show and not look ungrateful or wasteful, and thanked him for buying it for me. The coffee scalded, a price for freedom. He refused my thanks profusely and insisted he owed it to me, and he still had a hold of my hand. His refusal was a claim, his grip unrelenting. He crossed the final line. He kissed it again and again, holding it like lowly servants do in the cartoons to the lovely princess they're indebted to. His kisses were a violation, his touch a chain. I put up with it once more with the hope that it would soon be over. Hope was a lie, my patience a mistake. He pulled me closer as he did this, and reached down my shoulders like he wanted a hug goodbye. His arms were a trap, closing around me. I put up with this too. My politeness was my weakness, my fear a weight. Despite all his rude insistence, it still felt like he was overly friendly, perhaps lonely, and I felt bad just walking away. Guilt held me, a chain I couldn't break. His sudden jerk of my arm closer to him slid me along the booth closer to him, and he hugged me tightly. The hug was a prison. His strength overwhelming. He kissed my cheek, but when I thought he was letting go, he grabbed my face forcefully with both his hands and turned it into his, and he kissed me on the lips twice. His kiss was a theft, a violation in plain sight, desirously as if he were a Casanova movie star and I his femme fatale. His fantasy was my nightmare, his touch a scar. It was disgusting, and he did it in full view of the other customers sitting across the way. The cafe watched, its silence complicit. The escape was a wound. They'd thrown awkward glances our way throughout the entire encounter since we were the only ones talking and laughing in the cafe. Their eyes were a mirror, reflecting my shame. They especially had noticed his loud demands to the cashier. The cafe was a stage, and I was its captive. I was in too much shock to notice if they'd seen the last part, and I honestly didn't care. Shock was a fog clouding my mind. I have 5 minutes to reach the bus amid a huge, bustling station that I'd never been to before. Time was my enemy. The station a labyrinth. As soon as the stupid old man let go, I made an obligatory forced half smile and a goodbye and escaped on shaky legs into the crowded walkway. My legs were jelly, my heart a drum. I knew I'd missed the bus, but I had to leave the cafe anyway to escape. The bus was gone, my freedom bought at a cost. I hid, but not from fear. The next bus wasn't for 6 more hours, and the man was probably still there, just inside the mall area. And I didn't want him to spot me again. The mall was a trap, his shadow lurking. I waited at a different fast food place closest to the buses and inside of a police officer standing at the mall entrance just in case I saw him once more. The officer was a sentinel. My last defense, I sat, my suitcase a shield, my eyes scanning the crowd. The fast food place was a refuge, its noise a contrast to the cafe's betrayal. I waited, my breath shallow, my hands trembling. The station hummed, but I was alone, a stranger in a strange land. I was alone, but not broken, being in a different time zone from my family and friends. I felt I had no one to comfort me and made the mistake of frantically posting on Reddit in another sub. The post was a cry, a plea for connection. I got yelled at by security for resting my shaking feet on the bar of the chair beside me and broke into tears. The reprimand was a wound, my tears a release. I only told my one-night owl friend from earlier when she came online later, and as I didn't want to worry my parents or boyfriend about me traveling alone to this day, they don't know what happened. My silence was a choice, my burden mine alone. The friend's words were a balm, but not enough. I sat waiting for the bus, my heart heavy with what I'd endured. The scar remains. Who knows what he was really up to? Or maybe he really did want me to meet his family. His intentions were a mystery, but they weren't kind. I'll never know. The not knowing was a weight, a shadow that followed. I felt so gross and disgusting physically that I covered my mouth and tongue with hand sanitizer that I had on me. The sanitizer was a ritual, a futile cleansing. The taste lingered, bitter, as my fear. Mentally and emotionally, I was exhausted and distraught, of course, because I mostly felt stupid for letting things get that far. Self-blame was a chain binding me to the moment. The cafe was a memory, but its touch was a scar. I boarded the bus, Krakow fading, but his grip stayed with me. The journey continued, but I was changed, my trust bruised. So, scruffy old man, let's never meet again. The words were a vow, a prayer to keep him away. Don't sit too close, don't hold too long.